Welcome to Harry's Verse. Today's adventure: what if Harry Potter awakened the Flash's speed and rewrote the whole war in seconds? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The Speed Wakes. The motorcycle should not have been silent. Harry noticed that first, before the wands, before the cold, a muggle engine the size of a barrel had no business climbing into the night sky without a sound, and yet here it was, Hagrid's borrowed bike lifting off the lawn of Privet Drive on a cushion of charmed air, the whole machine purring like a held breath. Mad Eye had insisted on the silence. Mad Eye insisted on everything. 7 Potters, 7 escorts, a sky full of decoys, and one real boy buried in the middle of the plan where the curses would have the hardest time finding him. The plan lasted 9 seconds. They came out of the dark above Surrey the way a tide comes over a sandbar all at once, and from everywhere 30 cloaked shapes folding out of disapparition with their wands already lit. Harry had been told it would happen fast. He had not understood what the word meant. One moment the formation held, brooms in the straws and the bike fanning out under a moon the color of bone. The next, the air itself was a lattice of light, green and red and a sick electric violet, curses crossing the gaps between bodies faster than he could turn his head to follow them. Down, Hagrid bellowed and threw the bike into a dive. Harry's stomach went up into his throat. Below them the decoys scattered. He saw a flash of red hair that might have been Fred or George or the Polyjuice ghost of his own face, saw a broom go spinning riderless into a hedge, saw Hedwig's cage rattle against the sidecar where the owl beat her wings against the bars in white panic. A jet of green light passed close enough to taste, a smell like a struck match and something underneath it, something older and worse. He had his wand out, he was not fast enough to use it. That was the thing nobody had told him, the thing all the lessons in the world hadn't fixed. The war moved at a speed his body could not meet. By the time his eyes found a threat and his arm began to lift, the threat had already cast, already moved, already become a different threat in a different place. He was a boy standing in a hurricane with a stick. Stan Shunpike's face swam up out of the chaos, slack and wrong, the eyes empty under the imperious. His wand came around toward Hagrid's broad, unprotected back. And Harry watched it happen. That was the unbearable part, the part he would turn over for the rest of his life. He saw the wand tip bright. He saw the word begin to form on Stan's slack mouth. He saw the killing curse being born one syllable at a time, and he understood with a cold and total clarity that he was going to watch Hagrid die, and there was nothing in him quick enough to stop it. No, the word did not come from his mouth. It came from somewhere lower and deeper, a place behind his ribs that he had never found before, a door he had not known was a door. It came with a sound, not a sound he heard so much as a sound that was suddenly true, a single rising note like a wire pulled taut to the edge of snapping, and behind the note, faint and enormous, something that might have been 1,000 voices speaking at once at the bottom of a very deep well. And the world stopped, not slowed. Stopped or near enough that the difference was a thing for philosophers. The curse hung in the air a foot from Stan's wand, a bead of green light frozen mid-leap, beautiful and terrible and perfectly still. The rain had stopped, no, not stopped. Each drop hung in its place, a hall of glass beads strung between the clouds and the ground, and where the light from the curses touched them they glowed from within like a million tiny lamps. Hedwig's wings were open and motionless. Hagrid's beard had blown back across his shoulder and stayed there, frozen mid-flutter. The whole roaring catastrophe of the sky had been caught in amber, and Harry was standing in the middle of it, and he could move. He did not understand it. He had no time to understand it, and at the same time he had all the time in the world, which was the first lesson and the one that would frighten him most when he was old enough to be frightened of the right things. His thoughts ran clear and quick and cold. The curse was there. Stan's wand was there. He could not stop the curse. It was already cast, already free, a thing of the air now and not the wand. But the curse was not aimed at Harry. It was aimed at the space where Hagrid's back would be in the next quarter second. Move the back. He reached for Hagrid's shoulder. His hand came up slow, terribly slow, as if the air had become honey, as if his own body were the only thing in the world that still obeyed time. The note behind his ribs climbed higher. His arm burned. His feet, when he braced them against the floor of the sidecar, found no purchase, because the bike too was frozen, a fixed point, and he was the only thing with momentum in a universe that had agreed to hold its breath. He shoved. It was not a strong shove. He was a thin 16-year-old who had been half-starved most of his life, and Hagrid was the better part of a ton. But Hagrid was not, in that frozen instant, heavy in the way that mattered. He was a body at rest, and Harry was the only force in creation, and Harry's hand caught his shoulder and pushed, and the great frozen mountain of him shifted an inch, 2 inches, the smallest correction, sideways and down into the curve of the dive. Then the world let go. Sound came back like a slap. The rain hit. The note behind Harry's ribs broke and recoiled, and the recoil was agony. Every nerve in his body lit at once. His vision went white at the edges, and he smelled distinctly and horribly burning rubber. The killing curse passed through the space where Hagrid's spine had been a quarter second before. It missed by less than a hand's width. It struck the dark and was gone, swallowed into Surrey, a death that found nothing. Harry collapsed into the sidecar. His legs would not hold him. His shoes were gone, not lost, gone, the soles seared off and the leather curled black and smoking around his ankles, the skin of his feet stinging as if he'd run a mile barefoot over hot coals. His nose was bleeding freely, a hot copper flood down his lip and chin. His heart was not racing so much as roaring. A drum struck so hard and so fast that the individual beats had blurred into a single sustained note of panic, and he was shaking, every muscle quivering with a cold metabolic emptiness as if he had not eaten in a week. "Harry," Hagrid was bellowing, hauling the bike level, his face white under the wild beard. "Harry, yeah hit or yeah hit." "I felt summit, I felt you grab me, I'm fine," Harry said, which was a lie and which came out as a whisper because he did not have the breath for anything louder. "Keep flying, keep go." The chaos was already thinning. Whatever had happened in that single suspended instant, the rest of the world had experienced it as nothing, as the ordinary blur of a battle moving too fast to parse. Death Eaters were peeling away to chase the decoys. Somewhere far off a broom was burning. Hagrid threw the bike into a long, shrieking arc toward the Tonks' house and the safety of the protective wards, and Harry lay in the sidecar with his ruined feet and his bleeding nose and his roaring heart, and stared up at the rain coming down and tried to understand what he had become. He had moved the world. The whole world had stopped, and he had been the only thing in it that was free, and he had reached into a frozen instant and changed where a man's death would fall. He did not have a word for it. He would spend a long time looking for the word. Far below, in a place with no floor and no sky, something vast turned its attention toward Surrey, the way a sleeper turns toward a sound in another room, and noted that one of its children had woken up. The burrow took him in the way it took everyone in. Too much food, too many people, too much noise, all of it a clumsy human bulwark thrown up against the dark outside. Mrs. Weasley pressed a damp cloth to his nose and exclaimed over his feet and did not ask the right questions, because nobody knew the right questions, because Harry had not told a single living soul that the world had stopped and he had walked through it. He had decided not to tell them on the flight, somewhere in the cold and the rain, and the decision had felt less like a choice than a recognition. What would he say? "I think time stopped. I think I stopped it. I think I shoved Hagrid out of the way of a killing curse in the space of a quarter second. Except inside the quarter second it was not quick at all, it was slow, it was the slowest thing I have ever done. They would think the shock had unmoored him. They would watch him the way you watch a cracked teacup, and they had enough to grieve already because Mad-Eye Moody was dead and George Weasley had lost an ear to a curse meant to kill, and the night had cost them more than it had any right to. So Harry sat at the long scarred table in the Burrow's kitchen and ate 3 helpings of stew he could not taste and said nothing, and listened to the order count its dead, and felt under everything the wire still humming faintly behind his ribs. It had not gone away. The door he had found was still there ajar now, leaking a thin cold draft of something into him. When he closed his eyes he could almost hear it, that distant chorus at the bottom of the well, those 1,000 voices that were not quite words. "You're quiet," Hermione said. She had come to sit beside him without his noticing, which under ordinary circumstances she could not have done. Harry was a boy who had learned young to keep a weather eye on every doorway. She had a way of arriving exactly when she had decided you needed arriving at. Tonight her eyes were red-rimmed but steady, and she was looking at him with the particular focus she usually reserved for a book that had contradicted itself. "It was a bad night," Harry said. "It was." "That's not what I mean." She turned the cup in her hands. "When you came in you were burned. Your shoes," Mrs. Weasley said, "the skin on your feet looked like you'd run barefoot across a road in summer, but you were in the sidecar the whole time, Harry. You didn't run anywhere." Harry said nothing. "And Hagrid keeps saying he felt you grab him, that you pushed him out of the way of something." She set the cup down with a small click. "I'm not asking you to tell me. I'm telling you that I noticed, so that later, when you want to, you'll know you can." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to him in days, and it nearly undid him. He looked at her, really looked, the way the slow world never let him, and for one disloyal instant he thought about the door behind his ribs, and how if he opened it he could sit here for an hour inside the space of her next blink, and decide at his leisure exactly how much to say. The thought frightened him so badly that he stood up too fast and knocked his chair over. "I'm going to bed," he said. "Thanks, Hermione, for yeah." The order counted its dead in the small hours, and Harry sat among them and learned what kind of war he had woken into. Mad-Eye Moody was gone. That was the first and heaviest of it. Alastor Moody, who had survived 60 years of dark wizards and a lifetime of looking over his shoulder, blasted out of the sky over the North Sea by a curse meant for the decoy he was guarding, his body lost to the black water below. There would be no funeral because there was nothing to bury. Kingsley said it plainly, in the flat voice of a man holding himself together by refusing to feel anything yet, and the kitchen went quiet around the words, and Harry understood for the first time that the people in this room did not expect to all be alive by the end of it. They had done this arithmetic before. They knew the shape of the price, and they had decided each of them to pay it anyway, and the deciding was written in the tired set of their shoulders and the way no one looked too long at anyone else. George had lost an ear and made a joke about it, and the joke was the bravest thing Harry had ever heard, because it was offered up bleeding to a room that needed somewhere to put its grief. Bill's face was raked where a curse had clipped him. Tonks's hands would not quite stop shaking. And through all of it Harry sat with his bowl of untasted stew and his secret behind his ribs, and felt the gap between himself and these people widen into something he did not have a name for, because they had bled and lost and held the line at the speed everyone bled and lost and held it, and he had stepped sideways out of time and shoved a killing curse off course with his hand, and there was no room in their grief for a thing like that, no language, no place to set it down. He thought about Cedric. He thought about Sirius. He thought about every half-second he had ever been too slow, the whole long ledger of the people he had watched die in a present tense he could never catch, and he thought about the frozen rain and the bead of green light hanging a foot from Hagrid's spine and the inch by which a death had missed because Harry, for once in his life, had been fast enough. The two thoughts sat side by side in him and would not be reconciled. He had a power now that could have saved Cedric, saved Sirius, saved the man whose body was lost to the North Sea that very night. And he had it one death too late for every one of them, the way he always had everything too late, except now the lateness was a thing he might, with practice, learn to outrun. You should sleep, Lupin said low beside him. He had appeared without Harry noticing, which under ordinary circumstances no one could do. Whatever happened up there tonight, and I won't ask, you're gray to the lips, and you ate like a man who hasn't seen food in a fortnight, and Molly's 3 minutes from deciding you need a strengthening solution and a fortnight in bed. A ghost of the old kindness moved under his exhaustion. Go up, the war will still be here in the morning. It's very patient, the war, it's the most patient thing I know. Not the most, Harry thought, listening to the chorus hum its patient note behind his ribs. Not nearly. Lupin was right that he was gray to the lips, and Harry rose to go up, but the thing he carried with him out of that kitchen was not grief, or not only grief. It was the cold, quick knowledge, traitorous and undeniable, that for the first time in his life he had not been too slow, and that some part of him, even here, even now in a house counting its dead, wanted to feel that again. He climbed the crooked stairs to Ron's room under the eaves and lay in the spare bed and did not sleep. The burrow creaked and settled around him. Somewhere below, the adults murmured on into the small hours, grief and strategy braided together the way they always were now. And behind his ribs the wire hummed, patient, waiting, and Harry lay in the dark and was more afraid of himself than he had ever been of Voldemort, because he wanted to open the door again. That was the truth he could not say to Hermione, could not say to anyone. The fear was real and the want was realer, and the want frightened him precisely because it was so calm, so reasonable, so quietly certain that the world would be better if only he could move through it freely while it held still. He had spent his whole life being too slow to save Cedric, too slow to reach Sirius before the veil, too slow always, a boy a half-second behind the war, watching the people he loved die in a present tense he could never quite catch. And now there was a door behind his ribs that promised him the half-second back, all of them, as many half-seconds as he could survive. He got up. The window of Ron's room looked out over the orchard, the apple trees black against a sky going gray at its eastern hem. Harry stood at the glass with his bare burned feet on the cold floor and listened to the chorus, and decided that he had to know. Not because he wanted to, though he did, but because a thing that lived behind your ribs and stopped time was not a thing you could afford to leave unexamined. That was the cold, clear logic of it. If he had a weapon hidden in his own chest, he had better learn its edges before someone forced him to find them in the dark. He reached for the door. It was harder this time without the curse and the terror to do it for him. The first awakening had been a body's reflex, the way a hand snatches back from a flame. This was a deliberate turning toward, and the deliberateness made it slippery. He reached for the place behind his ribs and found only ribs. He reached again and found a held breath. On the third try he stopped reaching and instead simply remembered the frozen rain, the beat of green light, the single rising note, and the note answered. It came up through him like cold water finding the shape of a glass. The wire drew taut, the chorus rose from a murmur to a swell. In the world did not stop, not all the way. It slowed gently the way a film slows when the projector tires, and Harry found himself standing in a long amber moment, the gray dawn hanging unmoving outside the glass. A single apple frozen in the act of falling from a high branch caught a foot above the grass. His heart had slowed too, or seemed to. He could feel each beat arrive as a separate event, vast and deliberate, the whole muscle clenching and releasing like a tide. This time he was not fighting, this time he could listen. And the chorus, which had been a murmur at the bottom of a well, was suddenly all around him, above and below and inside, 10,000 voices, and none of them in any language, and yet he understood them the way you understand weather. They were not speaking to him, they were speaking of him. He was a new sound in their long song, a fresh note struck in a chord that had been ringing since before the world had a name, and they turned toward him with a curiosity that had no warmth in it and no cruelty either, only the immense impersonal interest of an ocean noticing a new river. Beneath the voices there was a vastness. He could not see it, and he could not see it. It was the place the speed came from, and it was not a place at all but a condition, a country with no surface, a lightning that had been running since the first instant of everything and would run until the last. It was patient the way mountains are patient, and it knew him. The certainty of that arrived whole and undeniable. The vastness behind the door knew his name, his real name, the one underneath Harry and Potter and the boy who lived, knew it the way the sea knows the shape of a stone it has been turning for 1,000 years. Run, the chorus said or did not say. Run and we will run with you. Run and you need never be too slow again. Harry let go of the door. The world snapped back. The apples struck the grass with a soft thud. The dawn finished arriving. And Harry stood at the cold window with his heart slamming and his hands shaking from a hunger that had appeared from nowhere and gone straight to the bone, and understood three things with the perfect clarity that would, before the end, save the world and very nearly cost it. The first was that he was the fastest thing alive, or could be if he learned. The second was that the speed was not free, and the price was written in his burned feet and his shaking hands and the bottomless hunger that had hollowed him out in a single slowed instant. And the third, the one he would not let himself look at directly, not yet, was that the thing behind the door wanted him to keep running and was prepared to be patient about it, and that the day he could no longer tell the difference between his want and its want would be the most dangerous day of his life. Down in the orchard, the apple lay in the wet grass where it had fallen, and far away and very close, the vastness settled back into its patience, satisfied. The river had found the sea. It would come again. They always came again. That was what speed was for. Harry went back to bed and at last in the gray and ordinary morning slept and dreamed of a country with no floor and a lightning that ran forever and his own voice somewhere very far ahead of him calling his name. He woke to the smell of frying and the sound of an argument. The argument was a comfort because it was the ordinary kind. Mrs. Weasley wanted the wedding postponed and Mr. Weasley did not, and both of them were too tired and too frightened to say what they actually meant, which was that they had buried a friend the day before and the world was ending and a wedding was the only thing left that felt like hope. Harry lay still and listened to it through the floorboards and let it remind him that he was somewhere with walls and people in it. Then he looked at his feet. The burns were gone. He sat up so fast the bed creaked. He pulled the blankets back and turned his feet over in the gray light and there was nothing, no blisters, no curled black skin, none of the angry red that Mrs. Weasley had dabbed with Dittany the night before. The soles were tender, the way a thing is tender after it has healed too fast, but they were whole. He pressed his thumb hard into the arch of his left foot and felt only a faint warmth like a coal banked under ash. Across the room Ron was a snoring heap, one long arm hanging off the mattress. Harry got up without waking him and stood at the window again and made himself think about it the way Hermione would, which was the only defense he had against being afraid. The speed had burned him. He had seen the proof on his own ankles. But the speed had also, somewhere in the night, unburned him, healed in hours what should have taken a fortnight. That tracked, if he was honest. Whatever the thing behind his ribs did to time, it did to him first. He had moved faster than the world for a quarter second, and his body had moved faster than its own healing to catch up. The furnace cut both ways, it cost and it paid. The trick, and he could feel already that his life was going to narrow down to the single trick, was going to be learning the exchange rate before it bankrupted him. He went down to breakfast and ate everything. That was the next thing he learned, and he learned it in front of an audience, which made it worse. He ate the eggs Mrs. Weasley put in front of him, and then he ate Ron's, and then he ate 4 slices of toast and most of a black pudding and a bowl of porridge with so much sugar in it that Ginny stopped halfway through a sentence to stare. The hunger was not in his stomach. It was deeper than that, a cellular emptiness, a sense that every fiber of him had been spent down to nothing and was clamoring to be refilled. He ate until the shaking in his hands stopped, and it took a frightening amount of food to stop it, and Mrs. Weasley watched him do it with her mouth folded into a worried line and her eyes saying things she was too kind to say out loud. "Growing boy," said Mr. Weasley into the silence, which was generous of him. "Mum, he's going to eat the table," said Ginny, which was kinder still because it was a joke, and a joke let everyone look away. Lupin did not look away. Remus Lupin had arrived sometime in the night, grave-faced and graver than Harry had ever seen him, and he sat now at the end of the table with a cup of tea he was not drinking, and he watched Harry eat the way a man watches a card he cannot place. He had been on the flight. He had seen something, not the frozen world, no one had seen that, but the outside of it, the impossible inch by which a killing curse had missed Hagrid's spine, the way the boy in the sidecar had been smoking and barefoot and unmarked by any spell. Lupin had spent a war learning to notice the things that did not add up. Harry could see him noticing. "You're recovered," Lupin said when the meal was breaking up. He said it lightly, and he said it where only Harry could hear. "Molly was certain you'd be off your feet for a week." "I heal fast," Harry said. "You do." Lupin turned his teacup a quarter turn on its saucer. "Mad-Eye used to say there were 2 kinds of survivors, the lucky and the quick. He didn't believe in the lucky." He looked up, and his tired eyes were not unkind, but they were not fooled either. "Whatever it is, Harry, and I won't ask, be careful who's watching when you do it. There were 30 of them in the air last night. Some of them got away. And the Dark Lord does not waste a thing he doesn't understand. He studies it." It was, Harry would realize much later, the truest warning anyone ever gave him, and it came from a man too decent to demand the secret it was warning him about. He held on to it. He held on to it all the way out the back door and across the dew-soaked grass to the orchard, where the apple trees stood in their crooked rows and a low mist was burning off the ground, and where for the first time he decided to find out on purpose what he could do. He chose a tree at the bottom of the slope, a gnarled old bramley 100 yards off, and he made himself a plan because a plan was the difference between an experiment and an accident. He would run to the tree, only the tree. He would keep his feet under him and his arms loose, and he would think the whole way, because the one consistent fact about the speed was that it gave him time to think, and a man who did not use the time it gave him was a man who deserved whatever the time did to him. He would touch the tree and stop, that was all, there and stop. He reached for the door behind his ribs, and this time it opened easily, eager as if it had been left ajar all night waiting for him to come back to it. The note rose. The chorus swelled. The world poured itself into amber, the mist hanging in shawls between the trees. A wren stopped mid-dart with its wings spread, a single bead of dew falling from a leaf and freezing halfway to the ground, a tiny suspended jewel, and Harry ran. The first stride was wrong. He had run his whole life the way everyone runs, pushing the ground away behind him, and at this speed the ground did not want to be pushed, it wanted to tear. His bare foot came down, and the friction of it was a white line of heat up his shin, and he understood in that instant, with the cold clarity the speed gave him, a full second of thought inside the space of a single footfall, that he could not run the way a boy runs. He had to run the way lightning runs, touching the world as little as possible, a thing of contacts and not of weight. He changed his stride midair. He brought his foot down softer, flatter, rolling, kissing the grass instead of striking it, and the heat eased, and the tree came toward him, not him toward the tree. That was how it felt, the whole orchard sliding past on either side like a river, splitting around a stone while he hung still and certain at the center of it. The chorus was singing. He could feel the furnace in him roaring, eating, the hunger already starting to gnaw even as he ran, the cost ticking up with every yard. The wren had not moved. The bead of dew still hung halfway to the grass. He had time, oceans of it, a whole unhurried second to cross 100 yards, and he used it to be afraid and to be exhilarated and to think one clear thought that frightened him more than the heat. I could go faster. I am barely trying. I could go so much faster. The tree arrived. He had told himself he would stop, and he stopped, and stopping was its own catastrophe. He had 100 yards of momentum and a body that wanted to keep it, and he flung the speed away from himself all at once like dropping a live wire, and the world slammed back to full size and full sound and full speed, and the recoil took him off his feet. He went down hard in the wet grass at the foot of the bramley, skidding, the heat of the friction flashing up his side, and he lay there with his cheek in the cold mud and his heart roaring and his whole body shaking with that terrible hollow hunger, and he laughed. He couldn't help it. It came up out of him in a kind of broken whoop, half terror and half joy, because he had crossed 100 yards in the space of a single dewdrop's fall, and the dewdrop. He turned his head and looked. The dewdrop had only just struck the grass. He had outrun a falling drop of water. He had outrun the morning. That, said a voice, was the single most ridiculous thing I have ever seen, and I have watched my brothers test their own products. Ginny was standing at the top of the slope in her dressing gown, arms folded, hair wild from sleep, staring down at him with an expression that was trying very hard to be unimpressed and failing. She had seen. Of course she had seen. He had thought of the speed as a private thing, a secret inside a stopped world, and forgotten that the stopping was only his, that to everyone else he had simply blurred from one end of the orchard to the other faster than the eye could hold, a boy-shaped streak of motion that ended with him face down in the mud 100 yards from where he'd started. Harry sat up slowly. His hands were shaking. He was very hungry. The chorus had quieted to its patient murmur behind his ribs, and the door had swung not quite shut, and the day was ordinary again, the mist nearly gone, the wren long flown. "You can't tell anyone," he said. Ginny came down the slope and crouched in the grass in front of him, and she looked at him for a long moment with the directness that was the truest thing about her, the thing that had always made him feel like he was being seen instead of looked at. "I'm not going to tell anyone," she said. "But you're going to tell me eventually, because you look like you found something that scares you, and you're not very good at being scared alone." She held out a hand and hauled him to his feet, and she was stronger than she looked, and she did not let go right away. "What is it, Harry?" He looked back across the orchard at the long, unbroken line of dew-bright grass between the gnarled tree and the place he'd started, the place where, for a single suspended second, he had been the only moving thing in all the world. "I don't know yet," he said, and it was the truth, "but I'm going to find out before it finds out about me." He did not know then how exactly wrong he had it. He did not know that the finding out had already happened in both directions, that the thing behind the door had known his name before he knew it had a voice. That 100 miles away in a cold house with a cold master, a tall, pale man was even now turning a captured memory over in his long white fingers, the memory of a killing curse that had missed a half-giant's spine by an inch it had no business missing, and reasoning slowly, patiently, brilliantly toward a conclusion that would reshape the entire war. But that was tomorrow's fear. Today there was only the orchard and the cold mud and Ginny's hand still warm around his, and the long, bright, impossible line in the grass. Harry went into breakfast and ate again and said nothing, and behind his ribs the wire hummed its patient note, waiting for the next time he would be too slow, and the next, for as long as he lived, which the thing in the Speed Force fully intended to be a very, very long time or no time at all, depending entirely on how fast the boy chose to run. 100 miles to the north, in a house that had once belonged to a family proud of its name, Lord Voldemort sat very still and thought about an inch. He did not rage. The Death Eaters who had returned from the Surrey ambush had braced for rage. Rookwood with his report half rehearsed into an apology, Selwyn already pale, and the rage had not come, and its absence had frightened them far more than any curse. The Dark Lord had listened to the account of the failed flight in silence, his fingers steepled, his red eyes half-lidded, and when Selwyn finished with the killing curse that had somehow impossibly missed the half-giant's spine by a hand's width, the Dark Lord had said only, "Show me." So they had shown him. Legilimency took the memory whole, and he turned it over now in the private dark behind his own eyes, examining it the way a jeweler examines a flaw, not with anger but with attention, which in him was the more dangerous thing. He watched the curse leave the wand. He watched it fly true. Selwyn was a competent killer, and the cast had been clean, the trajectory exact, aimed at the broad, unmissable target of the half-giant's back. And he watched the boy in the sidecar, the Potter boy, the real one, he was nearly certain, not move. That was the detail. The boy did not duck, did not cast a shield, did not so much as flinch. In one frame of the memory, the boy sat still with his useless wand half raised. In the next frame, with nothing between them, the half-giant had shifted and the curse passed through empty air. Nothing between them, no spell, no flash of magic, no incantation, no wand light. The instruments his Death Eaters carried, the ones tuned to register hostile casting, had recorded nothing in that instant. And yet a body the size of a small horse had moved 2 inches sideways in the space of no time at all, and a death had missed. A lesser mind would have called it luck. Voldemort did not believe in luck. He had spent 60 years dismantling the idea, prying open every coincidence to find the mechanism inside it. There was always a mechanism. The boy had done something. The boy had reached out and moved the half-giant in an interval too brief for the eye or the instruments to catch, with a force that left no magical signature because, and here the Dark Lord paused and his still face grew, if anything stiller, because it was not magic at all, or not magic as he understood it. Not a spell drawn through a wand, something else, something faster. He found that he disliked the word faster intensely, and he made himself sit with the dislike until he understood it, because Lord Voldemort did not permit himself feelings he had not interrogated. He disliked it because speed was the one axis of power he had never bothered to conquer. He had made himself stronger than any living wizard and more learned and harder to kill. He had unstitched his own soul and sewn the pieces into the world so that death itself could not find him. But all of that was a kind of permanence, a refusal to be ended. None of it was quickness. In every duel of his long life, victory had gone to the clever wand and the colder nerve, never to the faster hand, because among wizards the hand was always fast enough. The wand did the work and the wand was instant. He had never needed to be quick, no one had, and now there was a boy who had moved inside the gap between a curse and its target. A boy who had found the one direction Lord Voldemort had never thought to fortify. "My lord," Selwyn ventured after the silence had stretched past the point of safety. "Shall we? You will do nothing," said Voldemort, and his voice was soft, and that was worse. "You will tell no one what you saw. You did not see it because there was nothing to see. The curse missed. The giant was lucky. That is the whole of the tale you will carry. Do you understand me, Selwyn?" "Yes, my lord." "And you will bring me Bellatrix." The red eyes opened fully now, and in them was a light that none of his servants had a name for, a thing that was not quite anger and not quite delight and partook of both. "Tell her I have a problem worthy of her. Tell her the boy has learned a new trick and that I intend to learn it too, and then I intend to learn the thing that every trick has, the thing the boy does not yet know he has shown me." Selwyn hesitated, and then, because he was afraid and because fear made men ask questions they should swallow, he asked, "And what is that, my lord?" Lord Voldemort smiled, which was the most terrible thing his face could do. "A limit," he said. "Everything that moves can be made to stop. Everything that runs grows tired. The boy is fast, very well. Speed is not the question. The question is what speed costs him and how much of it he can afford and what happens when the bill comes due." He turned his face back to the cold window and the cold stars beyond it, and he was in that moment almost content because he had been handed a worthy puzzle, and Lord Voldemort had always loved a puzzle more than he loved anything that breathed. "I do not need to be faster than the boy, Selwyn. I only need to find the place where his speed runs out, and then I will be waiting there exactly where he cannot help but arrive." "Go," Selwyn went. And Lord Voldemort sat alone in the dark with the memory of an inch, and began with the patience of a thing that has made itself immortal to plan a trap that did not require him to be fast, only to be there first. Far to the south, in a crooked house full of warmth he could not have understood and would have despised, a boy ate his second breakfast and did not yet know he had been seen. And deeper than either of them, in the country with no floor, the lightning ran on, and the chorus sang its patient song and waited with an immortal's patience of its own for the boy to run again. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Faster than thought, Hermione made him keep a notebook. She produced it the morning after he finally told them, a plain Muggle exercise book, the kind with a faded red cover and a multiplication table on the back, and she set it in front of him at the breakfast table with the air of a general issuing a sidearm. Ron had taken the news the way Ron took most impossible things, with his mouth open and a piece of toast suspended forgotten halfway to it. He had said "blimey" 4 times, and then on the 5th had said, "So you're like what, faster than a snitch?" Which was, Harry would come to understand, exactly the right question because it was about limits, and limits were the only thing that mattered now. "We measure everything," Hermione said, "distance. Time, proper time, the time everyone else experiences, not whatever it feels like to you, what you eat, how you feel after, whether you bleed." She tapped the cover of the notebook. "You have something nobody in the history of magic has ever had, Harry, and the reason that frightens me isn't that it's powerful, it's that you don't know the rules, and a power without rules is just an accident waiting to choose its moment." So they made a laboratory of the orchard. They did it at dawn before the burrow woke, while the mist still lay in the hollows and the wedding marquee stood pale and enormous at the bottom of the paddock like a beach thing. Hermione held a stopwatch she had charmed to record fractions no Muggle watch could catch. Ron paced out distances with a ball of garden twine and a fistful of marker pegs, and Harry ran. The first finding was the heat, and it nearly ended the experiment on the first day. Harry ran the measured 100 yards between Ron's pegs and came to stop with the grass smoking behind him in a long scorched line, 2 parallel streaks of black and green where his feet had touched, and the smell of it brought Ron at a dead sprint with his wand out and an agumenti already on his lips. Harry stood gasping at the far peg with the soles of his trainers melted to glue and the hunger already clawing at him, and Hermione wrote in the notebook, in her small fierce hand, "Friction. He is not fast enough to escape it, he is fast enough to make it dangerous. The faster he goes, the more the world resists, and the resistance becomes heat. It's like a re-entering spacecraft," she said, reading it back to him, and at his blank look, "Never mind, the point is you're fighting the air and the ground. At that speed the air isn't nothing, it's a wall you're pushing through, and pushing through anything makes heat. You felt it on the bike, your shoes." So I burn up, Harry said. Brilliant. So you learned not to, Hermione corrected. You already started, didn't you, in the orchard the first time you changed how you ran? He had. He turned it over and found she was right that first dawn mid-stride. He had stopped striking the ground and started kissing it, lightened his contact until the heat eased. The body had known before the mind did. That was the pattern he was beginning to see. The speed came with its own instincts, a competence that lived below thought, and his job was to catch up to it, to drag the instinct into the light and make it a thing he chose instead of a thing that happened to him. The lightning came on the fourth day, and it frightened all three of them. He had been pushing harder, chasing the edge of how fast was fast, and on the fourth dawn he ran the 100 yards in what Hermione's charmed stopwatch recorded as 11 hundredths of a second, and when he stopped, the air around him cracked. A discharge leapt off his shoulders and his fingertips, not red, not green, no color any spell had ever worn, but a hard arclight white shot through with deep gold, and it earthed itself in the old bramley with a sound like a whip the size of a house. A branch as thick as Ron's leg blew apart, the tree caught. They put it out with 3 jets of water and a great deal of swearing, and stood afterward in the smoking dawn looking at the split black wound in the trunk, and none of them said anything for a while. That came out of me, Harry said at last. It came off you, Hermione said. She had gone pale, but she had also, he saw, taken out the notebook, because terror and curiosity lived very close together in her and she had never once let the first one win. You're building up a charge when you run, friction again maybe or something stranger, and when you stop it has to go somewhere. It went into the tree, she looked at him. It could have gone into Ron. That was the sentence that changed how Harry trained. Because she was right, and because it crystallized the thing that had been frightening him since Privet Drive, the thing underneath the joy. The speed was not a private gift he could use cleanly on a frozen world. It spilled, it had a wake. The faster he went, the more the world had to absorb when he stopped. Heat charge, the simple violence of a body moving where bodies were not meant to move, and the people he loved stood downstream of all of it. He could outrun a curse. He was not at all sure he could keep from killing the people he ran to save, so he learned to ground it. That took 2 weeks, and it was the first thing the speed ever taught him that felt less like running and more like discipline. He learned to feel the charge gathering as he ran, a pressure under the skin, a held breath in the muscles, and he learned to bleed it off as he went instead of letting it pile up to a single killing discharge, to trail it behind him in a constant fizzing hiss, a comet's tail of white gold sparks that earthed harmlessly into the grass yard by yard. Hermione's notebook filled with diagrams. Ron stopped flinching every time Harry stopped. And on the day Harry ran the full length of the paddock and came to rest a foot from Ron's chest with nothing leaping off him but a faint warmth and a smell like a struck flint, Ron grinned at him and said, "Okay, now you're faster than a snitch," and Harry felt, for the first time since the bike, that the thing behind his ribs might be a power he could hold and not just a power that held him. Some of what they discovered was terrifying and some of it was glorious, and the morning Harry ran across the surface of the mill pond was both. It had been Hermione's deduction scribbled in the notebook between warnings. If the world resisted him at speed, if the air became a wall and the ground became a thing that wanted to tear, then water, which was only a slower, thicker air, ought to hold him up, provided he never stopped. She had read him the principle the way she read him everything, dryly and with footnotes, and Harry had listened, and then he had gone down to the old mill pond below the orchard at dawn and tested it, because some things you cannot understand until your feet are wet, or, as it turned out, not wet at all. He hit the water at a dead sprint and did not sink. That was the whole astonishment of it, contained in a single impossible heartbeat. The pond took his weight because he never gave it long enough to refuse, each footfall landing and lifting before the surface could decide to be a liquid, so that he ran across the still black water in the gray light, leaving a wake of 2 diverging lines of spray and a rising mist where his speed bowled the surface to vapor behind him. He crossed the pond and the water meadow beyond it and came back, and the pond was glass again by the time he stopped, 2 thin trails of disturbed water settling into stillness, and Ron, who had come down to watch, sat on the bank with his mouth open and said nothing at all for a full minute, which for Ron was a kind of prayer. The walls were the same principle and frightened Hermione more. If he could run on water by never letting it become water, then he could run up a vertical surface by never letting gravity finish its argument. And Harry proved it on the side of the burrow's crooked barn, going up the wall and across the underside of the eaves and down the far side in a single unbroken sprint, upside down for the length of 3 heartbeats with the whole world hanging wrong above him, and his speed the only thing holding him to the timbers. He came off the barn wall laughing and was sick in the grass immediately afterward, because the body has opinions about being upside down at impossible speed that the speed itself does not share, and Hermione wrote in the notebook in her small fierce hand a single underlined sentence: he can go anywhere. The only thing that stops him is stopping. That was the rule under all the rules, and it was the most important thing they learned that whole month, more important than the water or the walls or the heat. Harry's speed did not fight the world's laws, it outran them. Gravity, friction, the surface tension of a mill pond, the simple solidity of a stone wall, none of them were broken, none of them were defied, they were only each of them too slow. The world's rules all required a little time to take hold, an instant in which to insist on themselves, and Harry had learned to live in the gap before that instant, to be gone before the law arrived to be obeyed. He was not a wizard breaking the rules of the world. He was a boy moving through the cracks between them, in the slivers of time too small for the universe to bother enforcing itself, and as long as he never stopped, never gave a single law the heartbeat it needed to catch him, there was, quite literally, nowhere he could not go and nothing he could not cross. It should have made him feel invincible. Instead, it frightened him more than the lightning had, because he understood the corollary the same morning he understood the rule, and Hermione had underlined it for him. The only thing that stops him is stopping. He could go anywhere. But the moment he stopped, every law he had been outrunning arrived all at once to collect: the gravity he had cheated, the heat he had outpaced, the water that remembered it was supposed to drown him, and the faster and farther he had run, the bigger the bill that waited at the end of the stop. He was not invincible. He was a boy perpetually one footfall ahead of a reckoning, and the reckoning never tired and never forgot and was always, always waiting at the precise place where he finally chose to be still. Then came the teacup and the cat and the thing with Ginny that he did not write in the notebook because some failures are too large for any notebook. The teacup was an experiment in carrying. Harry had reasoned and Hermione had agreed, with the careful reluctance of someone agreeing to test a thing she suspected would go badly, that the speed was only worth half of what it could be if he could not take things with him when he ran. A man who could cross a battlefield in an instant but arrived empty-handed was a messenger, not a soldier. So they started small. He held one of Mrs. Weasley's chipped teacups and he ran the paddock, and at the far end he opened his hand and the teacup was a fine pale powder sifting through his fingers. Every molecule of it accelerated to a speed it was never built to survive and shaken to dust by the journey. The cat was worse. It was not really a cat, it was Crookshanks, who had followed Hermione down to the paddock and would not be shooed, and Harry, thinking he understood the problem now, thinking it was a matter of holding on tighter, scooped the great ginger creature up on a slow morning and meant only to carry him a few yards, gently a test. He felt the cat go rigid in his arms the instant the speed took them. He felt the small body begin to come apart at the edges, the first smoking, the heat of their shared passage trying to do to Crookshanks exactly what it had done to the teacup. And Harry stopped so fast and so hard that he tore every muscle in his own back and went down screaming, but he stopped, and the cat lived, bolting from his arms with a yowl and a strip of singed fur and a hatred for Harry that would last the rest of its considerable life. He sat in the grass with his back in agony and Crookshanks screeching from a fence post and understood the rule now, understood it in his bones. He could not simply hold a thing and run. The speed was not something he carried, it was something he was, a field, a state, and to bring another living thing through it without killing it he would have to do more than grip it. He would have to make it part of himself. He would have to lend it his speed, extend the field, the impossible amber stillness, around another body so that it did not experience the journey at all, so that to the cat, to the person, no time would pass and no friction would build and they would simply be somewhere new with no memory of the going. He did not know how to do that yet. But he knew now that it was the door he had to find because the alternative was a power that could only ever save him, and a power that could only save Harry Potter was worse than useless. It was a temptation to selfishness with a war on. That night, lying awake in Ron's room with his back still aching and the chorus murmuring its patient song behind his ribs, Harry made himself a promise that he would break and keep and break again in ways he could not yet imagine. He promised that he would learn to bring people through with him. He promised that he would not be a man who only ever saved himself. And in the dark, faint and enormous and not unkind, the chorus seemed to answer not in words, never in words, but in a swell of something that might have been approval and might have been appetite, and Harry, on the edge of sleep, could not tell the two apart and was too tired to be as frightened of that as he should have been. The vision came when he pushed too far. It was the morning he tried to find the top, to run not at the 1100ths of a second pace that already split the air, but as fast as the thing behind his ribs would let him go all the way to whatever wall stood at the end. Hermione had told him not to. He did it anyway alone before the others were up because there are some questions a man cannot bear to leave unanswered, and how fast am I was for Harry the deepest of them. He opened the door all the way. The chorus did not swell this time. It roared. The note behind his ribs climbed past the place where it had a sound and into a register that was pure sensation, a brightness, and the orchard came apart around him, not into amber stillness now but into streaks, light smeared into lines, the whole solid world rendered down to the motion of itself. He ran and the paddock was gone in a heartbeat that did not happen, and the orchard wall was gone and the hedge beyond it, and he was running across the dark fields of Devon faster than he had ever moved, faster than thought, faster than fear, and still the thing behind his ribs said more, said yes, said come, and Harry, exalted and terrified, ran toward the wall to see what was on the other side. And the wall opened and there was no other side and he fell into the speed force. There is no honest way to describe the place because it is not a place, and every word for it is a lie that points in the right direction. It was a country with no floor. It was a storm made of lightning that had been running since before the first star and would run after the last one guttered out. It was a vast and luminous architecture, cathedrals of moving light folded into other cathedrals, corridors that were also rivers that were also sounds, and through all of it ran the lightning, gold and white and a deep impossible violet, the same color he had seen leap off his own shoulders, and Harry understood with the helpless total clarity of dreams that the lightning was alive, that the lightning was them, the chorus, the 1,000 voices, 10,000. The runners who had come before him and given themselves to the speed and never come back dissolved now into the current singing. They turned toward him. He felt their attention like a tide changing, and one voice came forward out of the chorus, or the chorus shaped itself briefly into one voice, and it spoke to him at last, not in words but in a knowing that arrived whole. You are the newest of us, the freshest river. We have run a long time, child, and we have learned the thing you have not learned, the thing that every runner learns too late, that the speed does not end, it only ends you. We are what is left when the running is done. We are the ones who could not stop. Harry tried to ask a question. In the place with no floor, the question became a thing he could see, a shape, a wanting, and the chorus saw it and answered before he had finished forming it, because in here cause and effect lay down side by side and there was no gap between them for time to stand in. You wish to bring others through. Yes, that is the kindness in you, and the kindness is also the lever they will use against you, but that is tomorrow. To bring another through, you must stop carrying and start including. The speed is not a horse you ride, and they cannot. The speed is a country, and you are learning to be its border. Widen the border, take them inside it. Inside, no time passes. Inside, there is no friction, because friction is the world resisting your passage, and inside there is no world but you. Do you see? He saw. It poured into him the way the orchard had poured into amber, complete and certain. The field around him was not a limit. It was a thing he could shape, push outward, wrap around another body so that they stood with him in the stillness, untouched, unhurried, included. He saw how to do it. He had it. And then he saw the cost, because the chorus showed him that too, showed it without cruelty, the way a sea shows a sailor the depth of itself. Everything you do in here, you pay for out there. To bring one through, you spend twice. To bring many, you spend until there is nothing left to spend, and then you spend yourself, and then you are here with us singing. We are not your enemy, child. We are your destination. Every river comes to the sea. We only differ on the question of when. Run well, run kindly. And when you are tired, and you will be so tired, remember that we are always here, and the stopping is so easy, and you need never be too slow again. The tide of attention turned away. The cathedrals of light folded back into themselves. And Harry came out the way you come out of deep water, all at once and gasping, and found himself lying in a hayfield 11 miles from the burrow, with his clothes smoking and his nose pouring blood and his whole body screaming with a hunger so total that for a moment he could not remember his own name, only the name the lightning had seemed to call him, which was already fading, which he would chase in dreams for the rest of his life and never quite catch. He lay in the hay until the shaking eased enough to stand. Then he walked home because he did not dare run, and it took him 3 hours, and he ate 2 loaves of bread he stole from a Muggle farmhouse on the way and left a galleon on the windowsill in payment, and when he finally limped back into the Burrow's kitchen at noon, gray and hollow and 11 miles worth of mud to the knee, Hermione took one look at him and did not say, "I told you not to." She put him in a chair and put food in front of him and waited until he had eaten enough to have a face again, and then she said very quietly, "What did you see?" "The end of it," Harry said. "Where the speed goes, where it wants to take me." He looked at his own hands, which had finally stopped shaking. "It's not a power, Hermione, it's a place, and it's patient. It's so patient. It doesn't want to use me up, it wants me to use myself up, and then it gets to keep me." He met her eyes. "But it showed me how to bring people through, it traded me. It showed me the way to do the thing I wanted, and it made sure I understood that every time I do it, I spin myself closer to it. That's the deal, that's the whole deal underneath everything. I can save anyone, it just costs me." Hermione was quiet for a long time. Outside, the wedding marquee shifted in the wind, and Mrs. Weasley's voice carried faintly across the paddock, fussing over chair arrangements as if the world were not ending, which was its own kind of courage. "Then we make the costs count," she said at last, and there was iron in it, the particular iron that Harry had learned to trust above any other sound in the world. "If every use spends you, then you don't waste a single one, no showing off, no running when you can walk. You treat your speed like the rarest thing you own because it's you. And when you spend it to save lives, and we keep count, and we make absolutely certain it was worth it." She closed the notebook with a snap. "You don't get to be reckless anymore, Harry. You're too valuable. You're the fastest thing alive, and that means you're the most expensive thing alive, and I am not going to watch you give yourself away 11 miles at a time chasing a feeling." It was the second kindest thing anyone had said to him in the war, and like the first, it came disguised as a scolding, and Harry, who had spent his whole life starved of exactly this, someone who valued him enough to be furious at his carelessness, felt something steady in his chest that had not been steady since the bike. "Okay," he said, "teach me to count then, and I'll teach you to run." That afternoon in the paddock, with Ron standing very pale and very brave at the center of a chalk circle Hermione had drawn, Harry learned to lend his speed. It went wrong twice before it went right. The first time he reached for Ron with the field and got the shaping slightly off, and Ron's hair stood straight up and a button shot off his shirt like a bullet and buried itself an inch deep in the fence, and Ron said in a high voice, let's not do that one again." The second time Harry overcorrected and folded the field too tight, and the two of them stood frozen in the amber stillness together for what felt to Harry like a full minute, the orchard hanging motionless around them. A bee stopped dead in the air a foot from Ron's ear, except Ron was frozen too, locked in the stillness, conscious but unable to move, his eyes the only living thing in a statue, and Harry saw the panic rising in them and let go too fast, and they both went down in a heap. But the third time he widened the border the way the chorus had shown him, not gripping Ron, not carrying him, but including him, drawing the country of the speed out around them both like a tent thrown over two men in a storm. And he ran. To Harry it was the same as always. The world poured into amber, and he moved through the stillness, and the paddock slid past. But this time Ron was with him inside the stillness, running at his side, or not running exactly, Ron's legs windmilling in a clumsy approximation while the speed did the real work. But there, present alive, his mouth opening in an O of pure astonishment as the frozen world streamed past on either side, the stopped bee, the hanging dust, the marquee standing like a vast pale ghost at the bottom of the field. They crossed the paddock and the orchard and came to rest at the far hedge, and Harry let the field go gently, the way he had learned to bleed off the charge, easing them back into the world's own speed instead of dropping them, and Ron stood there gasping and whole and unburned with his hair on end and his face transfigured with wonder. "Harry," he said. "Harry, the bee wasn't moving. We went past a bee that wasn't moving." He turned around and around, looking at the orchard they had crossed in no time at all, and then he looked at Harry with an expression Harry had never seen on him, something past astonishment, something close to awe. You do that all the time. That's what it's like in your head every time you blimey, Harry. How are you not mad? How is anyone that fast not completely mad?" "I don't know," Harry said honestly, and the chorus murmured behind his ribs, patient, waiting, and he thought, maybe I am. Maybe that's what this is. But he did not say it because Ron was grinning at him now, fierce and delighted, an ordinary boy who had just outrun a bee, and some things you do not say to the people who love you, not because you are protecting them, but because saying them out loud makes them truer than you can survive. The thing with Ginny happened on the night before the wedding. He had not meant it to be anything. He had gone out to the paddock to be alone with the chorus, and she had followed him the way she had followed him into the orchard that first morning, unbidden and unsurprised, and they had stood together at the fence in the warm dark with the marquee glowing faintly behind them. And Harry, full of the speed and the terror of it, had wanted, with a wanting so sudden and so total that it frightened him, to take her into the stillness, to wrap the border around them both and stop the world and stand with her in an amber instant where the war could not reach, where her brothers were not going to die, where nothing could ever change because nothing could ever move for as long as he could hold it. He got as far as reaching for the door. He got as far as feeling the note begin to rise, the orchard beginning to thicken toward amber, Ginny's face going still and golden in the frozen light, and he stopped because he understood in the held second before the stillness closed what he was actually wanting. He was wanting to keep her, to take a moment and pin it, to use the most powerful thing he had ever touched, not to save anyone but to refuse to let a good night end. And the chorus had been so pleased. He had felt it surge with approval as he reached, felt it lean toward the act the way it never leaned toward the careful disciplined runs. And that approval was the most frightening thing that had happened to him since Privet Drive, more frightening than the lightning, more frightening than the vision, because it taught him in one instant what the speed was for as far as the speed was concerned. Not saving, keeping, refusing. Holding the world still so that nothing could ever be lost, which is the same wish as wanting nothing to ever live. He let the door close. The night came back. Ginny blinked, and the moment was just a moment again, ordinary and ending, and she looked at him and saw something in his face and did not ask, because she was Ginny and she knew the difference between a silence you fill and a silence you guard. "Whatever it nearly made you do," she said quietly, "you didn't. I could see you not do it." She put her hand over his on the fence rail. "Hold on to that. The not doing, I think that's going to matter more than the running in the end." He did not write it in the notebook. Some lessons are not data, but it was the truest thing he learned that whole long month, and he carried it the way he carried Lupin's warning and Hermione's fury, 3 small fixed stars to steer by in the country with no floor, be seen when you use it, spend it only on lives, and the not doing matters more than the running. He did not yet know he would have to break the third one to learn how right it was. 40 miles away, a Death Eater raid went wrong in a manner that no one present could explain, and Lord Voldemort added a second inch to his collection. It was meant to be simple. A safe house in the Welsh Marches, 6 members of the Order's outer circle, a dawn raid, Yaxley leading, 8 wands behind him, the wards already softened by a traitor's careful work. They came through the broken wards at the grey hour and fanned into the farmhouse with the cold efficiency of men who had done this many times, and they found the 6 sleepers and they raised their wands. And then they were on the floor. That was how Yaxley described it afterward, and he described it badly because there were no words for it that did not make him sound mad. One instant his wand was rising toward a sleeping man's chest. The next instant the wand was gone from his hand, not blasted away, not summoned, simply absent, lifted from his grip in a movement too fast to feel, and his knees had been swept from under him, and he was face down on the flagstones with his arms wrenched behind him, and the same was true of every man he had brought, all 8 of them down in the same heartbeat, disarmed, dazed, their wands gone. And the 6 Order members standing over them, blinking in their nightclothes with no idea how they had come to be the ones holding the wands. There had been a sound, Yaxley said, a single sharp crack like a whip, like the air itself objecting, and a smell of burning, and for the length of one breath, a fine white gold light gone before the eye could fix it, that was all. 8 armed killers reduced to prisoners in less time than it took to fall, by something that left no mark and no signature and no trace but a scorch line on the flagstones and the wands, all 8 of them, stacked in a neat impossible pile on the kitchen table as if a tidy child had been through. When Yaxley finished his account, Lord Voldemort was silent for a long time. Then he rose and crossed to the tall window and looked out at the cold and beautiful morning, and he was, though his servants would not have dared to name it, happy. "He is learning," Voldemort said. 6 weeks ago he could only move himself, and only barely, and it cost him so much that he could do it once and then fall down. Now he disarms 8 men and stacks their wands. He has stopped reacting. He has begun to plan. He turned, and the red eyes were bright. Do you understand what that means, Yaxley? It means he has passed the dangerous part of learning a new power, the part where it is stronger than you are. He has it in hand now. He thinks he is winning. Yaxley, who did not understand, said nothing, which was the only intelligent thing he did that day. A man who thinks he is winning takes risks, said Voldemort softly. A man who thinks he is winning believes his power has no floor because he has not yet found it. He spends freely. He saves everyone because he can, because saving everyone feels like the whole point. He came back to the table and laid one long white finger on it and tapped it once. So we will give him everyone to save. We will arrange it so that the only way to save them all is to spend everything he has. And we will find the floor of him, Yaxley, the place where the speed runs out, not by chasing him, which is impossible, but by making him run until he cannot. Bellatrix is already at work. Severus brings me what the boy eats, how he sleeps, how gray he grows after he uses it. Every river runs dry. We need only build the desert. He smiled at the stacked wands, the tidy, impossible pile, the work of a boy who thought he was kind. He has shown me his kindness, Voldemort said. And kindness, Yaxley, is simply a list of the people you can be made to die for. I am compiling the list. Harry did not know any of this. He knew only that the raids his speed disrupted were getting bigger, that the Order had begun to whisper about a guardian angel none of them could name, that Kingsley had looked at him once across a meeting with a slow, thoughtful frown and then said nothing. He knew that he was getting faster and stronger and hungrier, and that the chorus behind his ribs sang a little louder every week, a little more familiar, a little more like home. And he knew this was the thing he held on to, the thing that made the cost feel survivable, that he could think now in a way he never had before. That was the gift underneath the gift, and it had crept up on him so gradually that he only noticed it the night before the wedding, lying awake while Ron snored. The speed did not just move his body, it moved his mind. When he dropped into the stillness, the world slowed, but his thinking did not, and a single second became a vast room he could walk around in, examining every wall. He had begun without deciding to live a little inside that room even when he was not running, to take the half-second between a question and its answer and use it, to run a dozen possibilities while another boy would still be drawing breath. In a duel now he did not see a curse and react. He saw a wand begin to move, and in the stretched amber of his own attention, considered every place it might be going, every counter, every consequence, a whole branching tree of the next 4 seconds blooming and being pruned before his opponent had finished the first syllable. He was no longer the boy who arrived a half-second too late. He had become the boy who arrived a half-second early every time to everything, and the strangest part, the part he could not explain even to Hermione, was that it had started to feel less like a power he used and more like the way the world actually was, a truth he had simply been too slow all his life to see. Everyone else lived in the blur. He lived in the stillness, and he was beginning to suspect he would never be able to go back to the blur again, and was no longer certain he wanted to. Faster than a snitch, Ron had said. Faster than thought, the chorus had called him. But it was not the speed of his feet that was going to win the war or lose it. Harry understood now, lying in the dark with the patient song behind his ribs. It was the speed of everything else, of his thinking, of his deciding, of the terrible, clean clarity that came over him when the world slowed and the choices stood out sharp as cut glass. He could cross a battlefield before a curse left a wand. That was true, and that was nothing. The real power, the dangerous power, was that he now had time, oceans of it, stolen from the seams between seconds to decide what to do when he got there. And the most dangerous question, the one the chorus kept singing under everything, the one he was not ready to ask out loud, was the simplest one of all. If he had all the time in the world, inside every single second, what would stop him one day from deciding that a second already spent could be spent again? Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, Winning Before It Starts. The war taught Harry that the fastest way to win a fight is to be standing on the other side of it before the other man knows it has begun. He worked it out as a problem in geometry, which was how Hermione had taught him to work out everything now. A duel was an exchange of intentions across a distance, and every intention took time to see the threat, time to lift the wand, time to speak the spell, time for the spell to cross the air. To an ordinary wizard, those times were so small they vanished into a single event called casting. To Harry, who lived in the seams between seconds, they were a sequence, a slow procession of separate moments, each one a door he could walk through while it hung open. He did not need to outduel anyone. He needed only to be inside their decision before they finished making it, so he stopped fighting duels. He started ending them. The first time he did it on purpose was a snatcher camp in the Forest of Dean. 11 men around a fire, and the old Harry, the Harry of 2 months ago, would have crept up and stunned one and started a battle he was outnumbered 11 to 1 to lose. The new Harry stood at the tree line and dropped into the stillness and looked at the frozen tableau of them. The firelight stopped mid-flicker, a thrown log hanging in the air above the coals, and he simply walked through the camp at a pace that to him was a stroll and to the world was no time at all, and he took every wand. All 11. He plucked them from belts and hands and the ground by the bedrolls, and he carried them. He could carry wands now, light dead things, with a trick of wrapping each one in a sliver of the border, and he set them in a stack 40 feet away behind a tree, and then he tied every man's bootlaces together in pairs because Ron had bet him he couldn't, and then he stepped out of the stillness. To the 11 snatchers, the world simply broke. Their wands were gone, their boots were lashed together. A boy was sitting on a log across the dead fire eating one of their sausages, and behind him the trees were faintly smoking, and not one of them could say how any of it had happened. 3 of them ran and fell over. The rest surrendered to a 16-year-old with a sausage because there is nothing in the human animal that can fight a thing it cannot perceive, and Harry had become to the ordinary eye exactly that, a consequence without a cause, an effect that arrived with its sentence already passed. The prisoner transport was the night Harry understood that winning before it starts could empty a war's whole machinery, if he was willing to be patient with his impatience. The ministry had begun moving Muggleborns by enchanted coach, long black things drawn by skeletal horses, run on a timetable, the cruelty of it dressed up as procedure. A dozen frightened people at a time carried north to places no one returned from. The Order had tried to ambush them twice and lost people both times because an ambush is a fight, and a fight gives the enemy a chance, and the enemy had grown careful. So Harry did not ambush it. He studied it first, 3 nights of watching a route, learning the timetable, mapping the guards, doing the slow, patient reconnaissance that his speed made him too impatient for and his discipline made him do anyway. And then on the 4th night he ended the whole thing in the time it took a coach wheel to turn once. He dropped into the stillness on a dark stretch of road with the transport frozen before him, the skeletal horses caught mid-stride, the guards mid-laugh, the wheel he had chosen as his clock stopped with one spoke at the top, and he worked. He opened the coach's locked door with the guards' own keys lifted from the guards' own belts. He brought the prisoners out one at a time through the border of his speed, 12 terrified people carried gently into the trees a quarter-mile off, and set down blinking and free before the wheel's top spoke had moved a finger's width. He took every guard's wand and snapped each one and laid the pieces back in their owners' pockets, because a snapped wand discovered later sows more fear than a wand simply gone. And then this was the flourish, the thing Ron made him tell at the burrow 3 times. He turned the empty coach around to face south, set the skeletal horses walking back the way they had come, and stepped out of the stillness. The guards rode a quarter-hour toward London before one of them thought to check the coach and found it empty, the door swinging, the prisoners gone, their own wands broken in their pockets, with no memory of a stop and no mark of a struggle and nothing to report but the impossible. 12 people freed, not a curse cast, not a life risked. A whole night of the ministry's machinery turned into a humiliation that would keep a dozen guards awake for a month, and a transport route that the ministry quietly cancelled within the week because no one could be found who would ride it. That was the shape of the autumn for those bright weeks before the village taught him better, Harry learning that his speed was worth most not when it won fights but when it made fights unnecessary, when it reached into the slow grinding works of the war and removed the people from the path of the gears before the gears could close. He freed 3 more transports. He emptied 2 holding cells. He intercepted attacks of children meant for the Carrow's punishments and had them home in their beds before their absence was filed. He never fired a curse in anger through the whole of it. And he saved more lives in those weeks than the Order's whole armed strength had saved in a year. And he began dangerously to believe that this was the answer, that a fast enough kindness could simply lift every victim out of the war's reach faster than the war could reach for them, that no one need ever die again while he was quick enough to be everywhere a death was about to happen. It was a beautiful belief, and it was a lie, and the lie had a name, and the name was that he was one boy and the war was a tide, and a tide does not need to aim. He would learn it in a burning village with a child in his arms. But for those few weeks he did not know it yet, and he was happy, and the people he carried out of the dark were free, and not one of them ever knew that the thing that had saved them was a 16-year-old who had not yet been taught the word enough. The Order did not know what to make of the reports. Captured snatchers, disarmed and bound and raving about a boy who moved like a struck match. Death Eater raids that collapsed into farce, killers found stacked like cordwood with their wands in tidy piles. A guardian none of them had assigned, working the length of the country, undoing the war one impossible night at a time. Kingsley, who was running what was left of the resistance from a series of borrowed kitchens, began to plan around it without admitting he was doing so. Lupin watched Harry across the burrow's table and said nothing, but the watching had changed. There was grief in it now, the particular grief of a man who has guessed that someone he loves has picked up a weapon that will not put itself down. And Harry, for a few bright weeks, was happy in a way he had never been because he was winning, and the winning cost no one anything, no Order members dead, no curses landing, just bewildered Death Eaters and saved lives and the clean joy of being at last fast enough. Then came Ottery St. Catchpole and the boy learned the shape of the word enough. They hit the village at dusk and they hit it to be seen. That was the part Harry understood too late. It was not a raid, it was a message. Voldemort had grown tired of his killers being humiliated in the dark by an invisible thing, and so he sent them somewhere they could not be quietly undone, a village full of muggles and wizarding families both, the little crooked town in the valley below the burrow, close enough that the Weasleys had bought their sweets there for 30 years. 20 Death Eaters came down the single high street at dusk with their masks on and their wands lit, and they did not creep and they did not aim for safe house. They began methodically to burn the town and everyone in it, and they did it slowly and loudly because the whole point was to be a fire the Guardian could not put out fast enough. Harry felt it before he was told, a column of smoke against the evening sky, the wrong color, and the chorus rising behind his ribs as if the speed itself could smell the killing. He was out the door before Hermione finished shouting, and across 2 miles of darkening fields in the space of 3 heartbeats, and he came over the rise above Ottery St. Catchpole and dropped into the stillness and saw the whole of it laid out beneath him, frozen, a tableau out of hell. 20 wands lit, fire standing in the air, every flame a fixed orange tongue. People in the street caught running, a woman with a child against her shoulder, a old man fallen, a shopkeeper in the door of his burning shop with his arms up against a curse that hung 6 inches from his chest. And curses everywhere, dozens of them frozen in flight, a constellation of killing lights strung the length of the high street, each one a death that had already been cast and not yet arrived. And Harry understood, standing in the stillness with all the time in the world, exactly the trap he had walked into because Voldemort had built it well. There were too many, not too many to fight. He could disarm 20 men as easily as 11, but too many deaths already in the air. The curses were cast. They were flying. Disarming the casters would not call them back. To save the street, he could not simply take the wands. He had to stop the curses themselves, each one individually in flight, intercept 20 separate deaths scattered across 400 yards of burning village, and do it before the stillness cost him more than he had. He went to work. He had never done anything like it, and he never forgot a second of it. He ran the high street in the amber light, and at each frozen curse he stopped, and he solved it. A conjured slab of stone swung into the path of a killing curse. A victim shoved bodily out of the line of a second. A third curse he could do nothing about but smother under a wall of earth he tore up from the road with his bare hands and his speed, the dirt flying into place grain by grain. He worked the geometry of it the way he had learned, each death a separate problem, each solution spinning a little more of the furnace in him. He felt the hunger come and then the shaking and then a deeper thing below the shaking, a kind of dimming, the dangerous gray he had felt in the hayfield after the vision. He kept going, the woman with the child, he moved them behind the stone trough. The fallen old man, he dragged him into a doorway out of the fire's reach. The shopkeeper with the curse 6 inches from his heart, Harry got a slab of slate between them with a half-second of stillness to spare, and the curse, when the world let go, would shatter against the slate instead of the man. 19. He saved 19 of them, and he was failing. He could feel it, the gray closing in, his thinking starting to thicken even inside the stillness, the chorus no longer singing but pulling, eager, delighted, drinking him down. And there was one more. One more curse, the last one, a jet of green hanging in the air at the far end of the street, and at the end of its frozen flight a girl. She was perhaps 9. She had run the wrong way, away from her mother, the way children do, into the open instead of the shelter, and the curse had found her, and it hung now a foot from her small frozen back, and Harry was 400 yards away with almost nothing left, and he ran. He did not make it. He understood halfway down the street, with the cold total clarity the speed had given him, that he was not going to make it, that the gray had him, that he had spent too much on the 19, that the last 400 yards were 400 yards too far, and that there was a girl at the end of them who was going to die in the next fraction of a second whether he reached her or not. Because even he, even the fastest thing alive, had a floor, and Voldemort had found it. And built a desert exactly one death wide and set it in Harry's path. He reached her as the world let go. He felt the stillness break around him like ice underfoot, felt the curse leap the last foot of its flight, and he was there, his hand outstretched, close enough to touch her hair and not fast enough, a hand's width and a heartbeat not fast enough, the same margin by which he had once saved Hagrid, spent now in the wrong direction. The green light took her, she fell. And Harry caught her as she fell, a half-second too late to be anything but the boy who held her afterward, and went down with her in the burning street with the chorus screaming its terrible joy behind his ribs and 20 disarmed Death Eaters disapparating into the dark around him, their message delivered, their lesson taught. He knelt in the ash and held a child the speed could not save, and for the first time since the bike he did not feel fast at all. He felt like the slowest thing that had ever lived. Her name was Daisy Hooper. She was 9 years old, and she had a brother at Hogwarts and a gap where her front teeth were growing back in, and Harry learned all of it standing in the Burrows' kitchen the next morning while her mother wept into Mrs. Weasley's shoulder because the Hoopers were a wizarding family the Weasleys had known for years, and the war had stopped being a thing that happened to strangers. He had saved 19 people. 19 families had their dead returned to them alive. The Order called it a miracle and meant it, and Harry could not feel the 19 at all. They were a number, a clean abstraction, lives that had simply continued and therefore left no mark. What he felt was the one, the hand's width, the half-second, the weight of a 9-year-old going slack in arms that had been too slow by the only margin that had ever mattered, the margin between fast enough and not. "You can't do that," Hermione said. She had come to find him in the orchard where he had been since dawn, sitting under the split black bramley with his back against the burned bark. She sat down beside him without being asked, and she did not touch him, and she did not tell him it was not his fault because she was too honest for that and she knew him too well. Telling Harry Potter that something was not his fault was the surest way to convince him that it was. "I had time to save her," Harry said. "That's the thing you don't understand. I had all the time in the world, I just ran out of me. I spent it on the others, and when I got to her there was nothing left." He looked at his own hands. "If I'd skipped one of the 19 and he was saved my strength, I'd have reached her. And then a different family would be in our kitchen this morning," said Hermione, "weeping over a different child, and you'd be sitting under this tree telling me that if you'd only saved Daisy Hooper a half-second sooner, you'd have had enough left for them." She turned to face him, and her eyes were wet, but her voice did not shake. "That's the trap, Harry. That's the actual trap, the one underneath the village. He's not trying to kill the people you save. He's trying to teach you that saving them isn't enough, that there's always one more, always a last one you didn't reach, and that the last one is your fault for not being faster. He wants you to believe your speed has a moral debt that can never be paid. Because a man who believes that will do anything to pay it." She took a breath, including things much worse than being a half-second too slow. Harry did not answer, but he heard her and he forgot nothing. He carried it, one more star, knowing already that it was the most important thing she had said and knowing already that he was not strong enough to live by it. The change to how they fought came out of that conversation, and it came out of Daisy Hooper, and Harry would think of her every time he used it for the rest of the war. He could not be everywhere. That was the lesson of the village, the hard floor of him. He was the fastest thing alive, but he was one thing and a battle was 100 separate emergencies happening at once. And even at his speed, he met them one at a time in sequence, and the sequence had an end, and at the end of it there was always the gray, and beyond the gray there was always someone he could not reach. He could not be everywhere, but he could be anywhere instantly the moment he knew where to be. The problem was not his speed. The problem was his eyes. He could only solve the emergencies he could see, and a single boy on a single rise above a burning town could not see them all, could not know which curse was already in the air and which wand had not yet risen, could not tell the death that needed him now from the one that could wait a heartbeat. So the team became his eyes. Hermione built it like she built everything, from first principles and against fierce resistance. Harry would no longer go alone. He would go with the others, positioned around the edges of a fight. Ron, Ginny, members of the Order. Anyone who could hold a vantage and keep their head, and they would see for him, call the board, mark the threats in the order they needed solving, because a person standing still at the edge of a battle could perceive the whole of it in a way that Harry, moving through the middle of it faster than light, never could. He lived in the seam between seconds. He had no time inside that seam to turn his head and survey a battlefield. But Ron, standing on a roof with a clear line and a steady voice, had all the time in the world to say the curse by the fountain first, then the man on the left, the children are already clear, and Harry, dropping in and out of the stillness between each instruction, could execute a plan he did not have time to make, guided by eyes that did not have to move at his impossible speed to be useful at it. It made them a single organism. Harry was the hand, they were the eyes and the mind that aimed it. And it doubled what he could do, because now he never wasted a run on the wrong emergency, never spent himself saving a man who was not yet in danger while a child died unseen at the far end of a street. It was the cleverest thing Hermione ever built, and it was built on a dead girl, and none of them ever forgot it, and they were all of them better and colder for it, which is what a war does to the people who survive it. "He has a floor," said Severus Snape. He said it in a cold room in a cold house to the coldest thing in England, and he said it carefully because every word he carried to the Dark Lord was a stone he had to set down without it ringing. He had spent the months since the boy's awakening doing the most dangerous work of his dangerous life, feeding Voldemort enough truth to be believed and shaping the truth so that it served a master the Dark Lord did not know Snape still served. It was a blade he walked, and the village had narrowed it. "Describe it," said Voldemort. "He tires. The faster and the longer he uses it, the more it costs him. Not magic, something cruder, something bodily. He eats enormously. He sleeps badly. After a great effort, he's gray for days, weak, slow as any ordinary boy. At Ottery St. Catchpole he saved 19 and could not save the 20th, and the difference was not his will. It was that he had spent himself empty. He reached the child. He simply had nothing left to be fast with." Snape paused exactly long enough. "Your trap worked, my lord. You found the floor. He cannot save everyone. There is always a last one he is too spent to reach." Voldemort was silent, and in the silence Snape watched him with the part of his mind that never stopped watching, and saw the thing he had come to see and dreaded to see, that the Dark Lord was not gloating. He was calculating. He had taken the floor of the boy, and he was already building on it. "Good," Voldemort said at last. "Then we know the shape of him. He is not a god, Severus. He is a furnace with a fixed amount of fuel, and we have learned to make him burn it. The village was the proof. Now comes the use." He rose and crossed to the window, the cold stars beyond it. "We will never beat him in a fight he chooses, because he ends those before they begin, so we will not give him fights. We will give him too much more to save than he has fuel to save, again and again, until the day comes when the last one he cannot reach is not a stranger's child in a village, until the day the last one is someone he would burn the whole world to save." He turned, and the red eyes found Snape's, and Snape held them with the discipline of 15 years and a love no one living knew about. "Find me that someone, Severus," the name at the top of his list, the one death he would refuse to accept. "That is the floor beneath the floor. That is where I will be waiting." "Yes, my lord," said Snape, and went away into the cold to find a way to lie about the one truth that could end everything, while his master sat alone and patient and pleased, building his desert 1 inch of dead ground at a time. The first time they fought as a single organism, it was to defend a safe house in Leeds, and it worked so well that it frightened Harry more than failure would have. Voldemort had learned to attack what Harry loved, and so the Order had begun to bait, to let a safe house be discovered quietly and then to be waiting when the Death Eaters came. Leeds was the first such trap they sprung with the the method Daisy Hooper's death had bought, and Hermione ran it from a rooftop with a clear line down the whole street, a notebook of contingencies open on her knees and the coins warm in her pocket. Ron held the far corner. 2 of the Order held the near one. And Harry waited in a doorway in the middle, not as a guardian who would react, but as a hand that would be aimed. When the Death Eaters came, 9 of them, fanning down the street toward a house they thought held sleeping refugees, Harry did not move. That was the discipline, the thing that had taken Daisy Hooper to teach him. He did not move until he was told where to move, because he could not see the board and the people on the rooftops could. He stood in the doorway and the world ran at its ordinary speed and the curses began to fly, and Hermione's voice came through the coin warm and steady and merciless. Third from the left has the children's window, him first. Then the two by the lamp post, they're casting fire. Leave the man at the back, he's slow, he's no threat yet. Go, and Harry went. He dropped into the stillness and the street froze, and he moved through it on the rails of Hermione, seeing the third man from the left, disarmed and bound before his curse crossed the glass. The two by the lamp post, their fire smothered, their wands gone, each target taken in the order a mind that could see the whole street had chosen, while the hand that could not see anything but the next instruction did the work faster than the work could be perceived. He did not waste a single run. He did not save a man who was not yet a threat while a child died unseen. He executed a plan he had not made, built in real time by people standing still at the edges, and in the space of 4 seconds the 9 became 9 bound and wandless men lying in a lead street with no memory of how they had come to be there, and not one curse had reached the house, and not one person Harry loved had been a half-second too late. It was flawless. That was what frightened him. He stood in the cleared street with the gray only just touching him, barely spent, and understood that the method made him perfect in a way that being alone never had, that a hand aimed by a body full of eyes could not be cornered the way a lone boy could not be drowned by too many emergencies at once, because the eyes triaged what the hand could not. He was no longer one fast thing trying to be everywhere. He was the striking end of a single creature with 100 eyes and one impossibly quick hand, and the creature did not tire the way a boy tired, because the seeing was done by people who did not have to be fast. That's it, Hermione said, climbing down from the rooftop, her face fierce and pale. That's how we use you without using you up. You stop being the whole army. You start being its sword and will be the arm. She looked at him and there was triumph in it, and under the triumph fear, because she had seen the same thing Harry had seen. We just turned you into something Voldemort can't beat with a burning village. He'll have to find something else. He would, they both knew he would. But for that one bright evening in a cleared lead street, the method held and the hand and the eyes moved as one thing, and Harry felt for the first time since Daisy Hooper that his speed might be survivable after all, not because he had grown stronger, but because he had finally stopped trying to carry the war alone. The war did not pause to let Harry grieve, and that autumn it began, quietly and then all at once to be lost. He had been so busy winning fights that he had not noticed he was losing the war, and the distinction nearly broke him when he finally saw it. He could empty a snatcher camp, disrupt a raid, save 19 people out of 20 in a burning street, and none of it touched the thing underneath, the slow machinery of a country falling. The ministry had become a thing wearing the ministry's face. Muggle-borns were being summoned to hearings that were not hearings. The Daily Prophet printed lists. Trains ran on time to places no one came back from. And against all of that, a boy who could cross England in a heartbeat was very nearly useless, because you cannot outrun a law, and there is no curse to intercept in the air when the killing is being done with stamps and seals and the patient cruelty of paperwork. Kingsley said it to him plainly in a borrowed kitchen the night the news came that the Lovegoods had been taken. You're the finest weapon the Resistance has ever had, Harry, and I would not trade you for an army, but you're a sword, and what's happening to us now isn't a battle, it's a tide, and a sword doesn't stop a tide. He looked old and gray and unbeaten only because he refused on principle to be. We need to cut off the head, everything else is just bleeding slower. The head was Voldemort. And Voldemort could not be reached the way everything else could be reached, because Voldemort had spent the war learning exactly the lesson Harry was teaching him, that the boy was fast and that fast had a floor, and that the way to beat a furnace was to make it burn. Every time Harry got close, there was a price arranged in his path, a village, a hostage, a choice between the man he wanted and the people he could not leave. Voldemort never once tried to be faster than Harry. He only ever made sure that being fast cost too much, and the chorus behind Harry's ribs had begun to offer a way out. It came to him at night, mostly in the gray, exhausted hours after a hard use when his defenses were thin and the door behind his ribs hung furthest open. It did not tempt him crudely. It was far older and far clever than that. It simply reminded him, showed him in the half-dreaming dark, the things he had not been able to undo. Daisy Hooper going slack in his arms, the half-second, the hand's width, and underneath the memory, gentle as a tide, the suggestion, never quite a sentence, never quite a voice, you were too slow, but slowness is only a kind of distance, and you have learned to cross distance. You cross space to reach her and arrive too late. There is another direction, child, you have felt it. The seam you live in between the seconds, it has a width, and the width can be crossed, and on the other side of it is the second before. You did not fail to save her. You merely failed to save her yet. Run far enough in the right direction, and there is no death you cannot arrive in time to prevent. There is no one you have lost. There are only people you have not yet gone back for. The first time the chorus offered it plainly, Harry sat up in the dark of Ron's room with his heart slamming and his whole body cold, because he understood, with the helpless clarity the speed always gave him, that it was not lying. He had felt the seam. He lived in it. The stillness was not really the world stopping. It was Harry stepping a little way out of time, into the gap between one instant and the next, and standing there while the world hung frozen, and if the gap had a far wall, the one he had fallen through into the Speed Force, then it had a near wall too, and on the other side of the near wall was the past. He believed it completely. He could feel that it was true. He could go back. He could reach Daisy Hooper while the curse still hung a foot from her back, and this time arrive in time, because this time he would not have spent himself on the 19 first. This time he would know, he would budget, he would solve the whole street with the child first. He could fix it, all of it. Every death he had been a half-second too slow to stop. The whole long ledger of his slowness, going back and back, Cedric, Sirius, his own mother and father in a cottage in Godric's Hollow. Why not? Why not them too if the seam had no bottom, if the past was only a distance and distance was the one thing he had conquered? Harry, Ron's voice, thick with sleep from the other bed. You're doing the thing, the lightning thing, your hands. Harry looked down, his hands were lit. White gold sparks were crawling between his fingers in the dark. The charge he had learned to ground rising in him unbidden, because some part of him had already reached for the door, already begun the run, already started across the seam toward a burning street 4 weeks gone. He closed his fists and forced it down, grounded it into the iron bed frame with a hiss and a smell of hot metal, and sat shaking in the dark with the worst thing he had ever wanted singing softly behind his ribs. I'm okay, he said, go back to sleep. But he was not okay, and he did not sleep, and in the morning he told Hermione, because she was the only fixed point he had and because he was frightened of himself in a way that no battle had ever frightened him. She did not tell him it was impossible. That was the thing he would remember, that Hermione Granger, who had spent her life being the one who said that can't be done, looked at him across the breakfast table and did not say it. She had seen too much of what he could do. She knew the impossible had become a thing he did before lunch, so she did not tell him it was impossible. She told him something worse. If you could, she said slowly, turning her cup, go back, reach Daisy Hooper in time, then the version of you that's sitting here that lived through her dying, where does he go? Because he's real, Harry, he happened, you happened. You can't unhappen the boy who held her even if you save her. You'll have made a world where she lived, but you'll still be the one who remembers the world where she didn't, and that's the small problem. She set the cup down. The large problem is that you don't know what else moves when you move her. You spent 3 months learning that you can't run without leaving a wake, heat, lightning, the world having to absorb what you spend. You think time won't have a wake. You think you can reach into the second before a child dies, change it, and have nothing else change. She held his eyes. You're the fastest thing alive. You are not the only thing alive, and every other thing is downstream of you. You taught me that with the teacup, with Crookshanks. You can't bring something through the speed without making it part of you, and you can't change a moment without making the whole world part of your run. I don't know what the price is, but I know you, and I know there's a price, and I know you'll think it's worth it right up until the second it is. Harry said nothing for a long time. Outside the window the orchard stood bare now, the leaves gone, the split Bramley black against a white November sky. The chorus murmured, the door hung ajar. He's going to win, Hermione, he said at last, very quietly. Kingsley's right. I can save people one street at a time forever, and Voldemort will still win because he's not fighting battles, he's drowning the country, and I can't fight a tide with a sword. The only way to actually win, the only way, is to get to him. And every time I try, he makes me choose between him and a street full of people I can't leave to die. He's built his whole strategy on the fact that I won't sacrifice anyone. He looked at her and his eyes were terrible because they were calm. But if I could go back, if a death wasn't permanent, if I could take the fight to him knowing that whoever he sacrifices to stop me, I can simply return and save afterward, then he loses his only weapon. The hostages stop working. The villages stop working, there's nothing left to threaten me with because there's nothing he can take that I can't go back and take again. He spread his hands. Don't you see, it's not about Daisy Hooper, it's about the war. If I can rewrite a moment, I can't be cornered, and if I can't be cornered, I win. It was the most frightening thing he had ever said. And it was frightening precisely because it was good, because it was clever and clean and very nearly right. The kind of argument that wins. The kind of argument a boy who lived in the seam between seconds and had been raised to believe his whole worth was measured in lives saved would find almost impossible to refuse. Hermione heard the whole shape of it, and she went pale because she heard underneath the strategy the chorus singing, and she understood that the thing in the Speed Force had not tempted Harry with grief in the end. It had tempted him with responsibility. It had found the one lever that could move a boy like Harry, and it was not the people he had lost. It was the people he might yet save, and the unbearable arithmetic of being the only one fast enough to save them, and the open door that promised he need never come up one death short again. Harry, she said, and her voice was steady only because she made it so. Promise me you'll talk to me before you open that door, not after, before. Whatever it shows you, whatever it argues, whatever clever true thing it tells you about the war, come to me first, and we work the price out together, the way we worked out the heat and the lightning and the mass, because you have never once gotten a power right on the first try, and this is the one where the first try might be the last. She reached across the table and took his lit and flickering hand in both of hers and held it, sparks and all, until the light went out of it. Promise me. I promise, Harry said. He meant it with everything in him. And behind his ribs, patient as the sea, the chorus sang and the door hung open, and somewhere 4 weeks back a curse still hung a foot from a small girl's back, frozen in a seam Harry now knew how to cross, waiting, the way everything that loved him and everything that wanted him waited, for the night he would be too tired or too cornered or too certain he was right to keep a promise made over a cold cup of tea on a white November morning. It would not be a long wait. Nothing ever waited long for the fastest thing alive. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, the temptation of time. He broke his promise on the night they took the Burrow. It was not supposed to be possible. The Burrow was warded as heavily as any place in Britain, layered round with Mr. Weasley's charms and the Order's work and the simple fierce magic of a home that had been loved for 40 years. But Voldemort had stopped attacking the things Harry could defend and started attacking the things Harry loved, And he had learned that a ward is only a wall, and walls fall to patience, and the Dark Lord had nothing if not patience. They came at the dead black hour before dawn, a dozen of them with a cursebreaker who had once worked for Gringotts, and they peeled the burrow's wards apart layer by layer while the house slept, and the first anyone knew of it was the kitchen wall coming in. Harry was awake. He was always awake now in the small hours, listening to the chorus, and so he was already moving when the wall blew, already in the stillness, already across the landing, and that was the only reason any of them lived past the first 10 seconds, because in those 10 seconds Harry did more than any wizard had ever done in 10 seconds in the history of the world. He took the family out. One at a time, the way he had learned, wrapping the border around each of them, Ron, Ginny, Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, Hermione, Fleur, the others sheltering there, and carrying them through the stillness out of the collapsing house and across the fields to the tree line a half-mile off. One impossible trip after another, faster than the Death Eaters' curses could find the spaces where they had been. 6 trips. 7. Each one spent him. The gray came early and came hard because he was carrying living people now, the most expensive thing the speed could move. And by the 7th trip his hands were shaking and his nose was bleeding freely and the chorus was no longer singing but roaring, drinking him down in great greedy draughts, delighted because this was what it wanted, this was the spending, this was the boy pouring himself out. He got them all. Every Weasley, every guest, out of the house and into the dark and behind the cover of the trees, alive. He counted them in the gray haze of his exhaustion, his heart hammering, the burning house lighting the field orange behind him, all of them. He had done it. He had saved Fred. Fred Weasley had gone back. It was the kind of thing only a Weasley would do, and only Fred, and Harry pieced it together too late from George's screaming. Fred had not been in the house when Harry made his trips. Fred had been outside already on watch on the far side, and when the wall blew he had run toward it, toward his family, wand out, the way every Weasley ran toward the people they loved instead of away, and Harry, counting heads at the tree line, carrying bodies out of a house, had not known Fred was never in the house to carry, had not seen him circle round through the orchard into the open ground where 3 Death Eaters were already turning, already raising their wands. At a single red-haired boy standing alone between them and the burning home he would not leave. Harry saw it as the world let go. He saw the 3 curses leave the 3 wands. He saw them cross the dark toward Fred, who was grinning even now, even here, firing back, fearless and doomed. And Harry was empty, gray to the bone, 7 trips spent, nothing left in the furnace, the floor of him right there under his feet, and he reached for the speed and it guttered like a candle in a wind, and he was, for the 3rd time in his life and the worst, a half-second too slow. The curses took Fred, all 3. He went down in the orchard he had grown up climbing, still grinning, and the grin was the thing, the grin was what broke Harry because it was the last joke, the final unbearable Weasley joke, dying with a smile on the grass under the apple trees while his twins screamed his name across a burning field. And Harry, on his knees in the wet grass with nothing left, looked at the open door behind his ribs, and the chorus stopped roaring and went very, very still and offered him gently, lovingly, the thing it had been offering him for months. You were too slow, but slowness is only distance. Go back, he is not gone. He is 4 minutes behind you, alive, grinning on watch on the far side of the house. Go back and stand beside him. You have nothing left, but you do not need the furnace to fall through a seam you are already standing in. You need only let go, child. Stop holding yourself in this second. Step back into the one before. He is right there. He has always been right there. You have only to run. Harry ran. He did not decide to. That was the truth he would carry for the rest of his life, the truth that frightened him more than the act. There was no decision. There was Fred grinning dead in the grass and George screaming and the whole warm world he had failed to keep. And there was a door and he went through it, the way water goes downhill, the way a held breath finally breaks. He let go of the second he was standing in and he fell backward through the seam against the grain of time, into the dark and the lightning and the chorus's terrible welcoming joy in time tore. There is no other word for what it felt like. He had crossed space 10,000 times and space gave way before him like air. Time did not give way. Time resisted the way the ground resisted his bare feet that first morning, the way the air resisted its speed, except this was not friction, this was something tearing, something that was not meant to part being made to part, and the cost of it was not heat and not hunger but a wrongness, a deep structural wrongness that he felt in his teeth and his marrow and the back of his eyes, the universe itself objecting to the boy running the wrong way down its one-way street. He ran against the current. The chorus screamed with delight or warning, he could not tell which, and the lightning ran backward around him, and the world unspooled, the burning house unburned. The curses flew backward into wands, the dead grass stood up, and Harry ran 4 minutes against the grain of everything and came out the far side gasping into a night that had not happened yet. The burrow stood whole behind him. The wards still held. And on the far side of the house, on watch, alive, grinning at nothing in the dark, stood Fred Weasley. Fred, Harry's voice came out wrecked. Fred, the wards, they're breaking them, the kitchen wall. In 4 minutes the kitchen wall comes in, get inside, get everyone, get down. And Fred, to his eternal credit, did not ask how Harry had come to be standing in front of him soaked and shaking, and 4 minutes early to a disaster that had not started. He took one look at Harry's face and he ran the right way this time, toward the house, toward the warning instead of toward the curses, and Harry ran with him. And this time he was not empty, this time he had the whole night ahead of him to spend. And when the kitchen wall came in on schedule he was ready, and he took the family out, all of them, Fred among them, and he stood them at the tree line and counted heads, and there were no gaps in the count. He had done it. He had reached back into a dead boy's last 4 minutes and pulled him out alive. Fred Weasley stood in the dark at the tree line with his arm around his twin, both of them whole, both of them breathing, and George did not know what he had been saved from, and Fred did not know, and only Harry knew. Harry in the chorus that a boy had died in the grass and then undied, called back across a tear in the world by the fastest thing alive. It was the happiest moment of Harry's life. It lasted about 90 seconds. Then the screaming started from the other side of the tree line, where Remus Lupin lay dead with his wife's name on his lips, killed by a curse that 4 minutes ago in the world that Harry had unmade had never been cast at all. Lupin had not died in the first world. Harry was certain of it. He had counted heads at the tree line twice in the gray haze of his exhaustion, and Lupin had been there alive, his arm around Tonks, both of them whole. Fred had died and Lupin had lived. That was the world Harry had unmade. And in the new world, the world he had run back to build, the world where Fred grinned alive at the tree line, Remus Lupin lay dead on the cold ground with 3 Death Eaters working his chest, and Tonks knelt over him keening, and the count had no gap because the gap had only moved. Harry understood it then, kneeling between the two of them, the saved twin and the dead wolf, with the chorus humming its satisfaction behind his ribs. He understood the price, and it was the cruelest price the universe could have named because it was not paid by him. He had reached back 4 minutes and changed where the Death Eaters were looking, pulled Fred out of the curse's path, and the curses no longer meeting Fred had flown on, had found another target in the chaos, had taken the man who in the first world had been a step to the left, a half-second later, just out of their line. The deaths were not cancelled. They were conserved. He had not saved a life, he had moved one. He had reached into the machinery of a single terrible night and shifted which of the people he loved would die in it, and the universe had balanced its books with a precision that felt, kneeling there in the dark, exactly like malice. "What did you do?" Hermione's voice behind him, very low. She had seen not the running, no one saw the running, but she had seen Harry arrive at the tree line soaked and 4 minutes early, had seen Fred alive who she had glimpsed falling, had done the arithmetic that only she and Harry could do. "Harry, what did you do?" "I went back," Harry said. His voice did not sound like his own. "For Fred, he was dead, Hermione. I saw him, 3 curses, and I had nothing left, and I went back. I pulled him out." He looked at Lupin's still face, at Tonks's shaking shoulders. "I didn't save him, I traded him. I traded Fred for Remus, and I didn't even know I was doing it. The trade just happened, the curses just found someone else. It's like the night had a price, and all I got to choose was who paid it." And the worst of it, the thing he could not say even to Hermione, was the voice behind his ribs, which was not horrified at all. The chorus was pleased. It had wanted him to run, and he had run, and now there was a wolf dead who had been alive. And the chorus regarded this the way the sea regards a drowned sailor, without cruelty, without remorse, simply as the natural consequence of the running, the toll of the road, a thing that was always going to happen the moment a river decided to flow uphill. So Harry did the thing the chorus had been building toward all along, the thing that turns a single sin into a habit and a habit into a fall. He decided to fix it. It was so reasonable. That was the horror of it. It was always so reasonable. If the deaths were conserved, if going back for Fred had cost Lupin, then he had simply not gone back well enough. He had run in blind, exhausted, with no plan, and grabbed the first life he could reach, and let the universe choose the balancing payment. But he was Harry Potter, who had learned to solve a burning street curse by curse, who lived in the seams between seconds and had oceans of time to think. He did not have to let the universe choose. He could go back again further this time before the wall fell, before any of it, and this time he would not pluck one life out of the machine and let the machine take its revenge. This time he would unmake the whole attack, warn them all, empty the house before the cursebreaker ever reached the wards. Save Fred and Remus and everyone, no trade, no toll, a clean rewrite. The night unhappened entirely. He did not promise Hermione first. He had promised to come to her before he opened the door, and he had already opened it once, and the door once opened does not close the way it opened. The second crossing is always easier than the first, and the third easier than the second, and Harry, gray and grieving and certain he was right, stepped back into the seam without a word to anyone and ran against the grain of the world for the second time in one night. It tore worse. The universe had not wanted the first crossing. It actively fought the second, as if it had learned his trick and braced against it, and the wrongness in his marrow became a wrongness in the air itself, a sense of fabric straining, of a seam picked at one too many times. He ran back past the falling wall, past the breaking wards, back to the quiet hour before the Death Eaters came, and he came out into the burrow's dark kitchen with everyone asleep above him and the attack still an hour from happening, and he thought, now I fix it, now I save them all. And the chorus showed him the fractured lines. It came over him the way the vision in the hayfield had come, the world peeling back into the country with no floor, the cathedrals of light. But this time the light was wrong, this time there were cracks in it, and the chorus turned him gently the way you turn a child to make him look at the thing he has broken, and showed him what his running had done to time. He saw the night he was standing in, and he saw it was not solid anymore. Where he had reached in and pulled Fred out, the fabric was scarred, a pucker, a knot of crossed-out and rewritten event, and from the knot ran cracks, fine bright fracture lines spreading outward into the hours and days on either side, into the future, into other lives, small wrongnesses propagating like a stone's rings across a pond. A man in Diagon Alley who in the first world had turned left and now turned right and met a fate he was never meant to meet. A letter that arrived a day late. A child not conceived or conceived who never would have been. The whole delicate clockwork of consequence jarred out of true by a single boy's refusal to accept a single death and ringing now with a damage that spread and did not stop spreading. This is the wake, the chorus said, and for the first time there was something almost like tenderness in it, the tenderness of a thing watching a beloved child learn the lesson it had always known he would have to learn. You asked your friend what the price would be. Here it is, you cannot change a moment. You can only move the damage, and the damage, once moving, never stops. Every rewrite is a stone in a still pond, and the rings cross other rings, and there is no bottom and no edge and no clean version ever of a night you have decided not to accept. Save them all then, try, we will not stop you. We want nothing more than for you to run and run and run, until you have rewritten so much that there is no solid ground left anywhere, and the only fixed thing in all the cracked and ringing world is you, the runner, the one who remembers. And then, child, then you will be ours entirely, because you will have nowhere left to stand but here with us in the lightning, where nothing changes because nothing is allowed to be real. Harry stood in the dark kitchen an hour before the attack, with everyone he loved asleep and savable above him, and he saw the fracture lines, and he understood at last what the door behind his ribs had always been for. It was not a gift. It had never been a gift. It was a hook baited with the one thing he could never refuse, the chance to be in time, just once more, for someone he had been too slow to save, and every time he took the bait the hook set deeper and the world cracked further, and the only place left standing at the end of all the rewrites was the country with no floor where the chorus waited to keep him forever. He had come back to save them all. He could feel that he could do it. The house was right there. An hour of warning would empty it cleanly. And Harry Potter, the fastest thing alive, standing in a dark kitchen with the power to unmake the worst night of his life, made the hardest decision he had ever made and the one that saved the world, though it would not feel like saving for a long and bitter time. He chose to let it happen. Letting it happen was the hardest thing he ever did, and he did it with his eyes open. He stood in the dark kitchen and let the hour run out. He did not warn them. He did not empty the house. He climbed the stairs and lay down in Ron's room beside his sleeping friend and waited for the wall to come in. And when it came in he moved, but only as much as he had moved the second time. Only the trips he had already made, the family carried out, Fred pulled clear. The same night rebuilt exactly as he had rebuilt it. No more rewriting, no new cracks, the fracture held to the single scar he had already cut. And then he walked to the far side of the tree line and he stood 10 feet from Remus Lupin, and he watched 3 curses cross the dark, and he did not run. He could have. That was the part that would live in him forever. He had the speed back, the night ahead of him, the furnace full. He could have crossed 10 feet and put a slab of conjured stone between the curses and the wolf as easily as breathing. And he did not, because he had seen the fracture lines, because he knew now that saving Lupin would only move the death again. To Tonks, to Ron, to a stranger in Diagon Alley, on and on, the rings spreading, the world cracking, until there was nothing solid left anywhere. And because the only way to stop the cracks from spreading was to stop cutting, to let the night be the night it had become, to accept the one death he had already unknowingly traded for. So Harry Potter stood still, he, the fastest thing alive, who had spent 3 months learning that standing still was the one thing he never had to do again, and let a man he loved die on purpose to save a world the man would never know had been in danger. Lupin fell with Tonks's name on his lips. And Harry, 10 feet away, fast enough to catch him, chose to be slow, and it was the most terrible use of his speed he ever made, the use that was a refusal, the not doing that Ginny had told him would matter more than the running. She had been right. He understood it now, standing in the dark with his terrible, useless quickness, weeping for a man he had killed by declining to save twice. The not doing mattered more than the running. It was the whole of the lesson, and it had cost Remus Lupin's life to teach him, and Harry swore over the body in the burning dark, the vow that would carry him through everything that came after. He would never rewrite again, not for grief, not for love, not for the war, not for the world, not for any death however unbearable. He had touched the forbidden door and he had seen what lay on the far side of it, not a chance to save the people he had lost, but a hook baited with exactly that, set to drag him and the whole cracking world down into the lightning where nothing was allowed to be real. The chorus could sing. It could show him every death he had ever been too slow for, parade them through his exhausted nights forever. He would not open the door. He would be fast, faster than anything, faster than thought, faster than curses and laws and the falling tide of the war, but he would be fast forward in the one direction time allowed, and the past would stay where the past belonged. Behind him, fixed, unrewritable, full of the dead he had failed and would go on failing, because that was the price of being real, and he had decided over Lupin's body to stay real whatever it cost. You let him die, Hermione said. She had come to stand beside him in the dark. She was crying. She was also, he saw, looking at him with something that was not horror, something closer to awe and grief twined together. I saw your face. You could have saved him. You stood there. Why? Because saving him would have killed someone else, Harry said. And saving them would have killed someone else forever. The cracks just keep going, Hermione. There's no clean version. There's never a clean version. The only way to stop the damage spreading was to stop. His voice broke. I went back for Fred. That's why Remus is dead. I traded them and I didn't even know I was doing it. And when I tried to fix the trade, it only made it worse. And the only thing I could do that didn't make it worse was let the worst thing stand. He looked at her and his face was wet and his eyes were ancient. I'm never doing it again. The door, I'm never opening it again, whatever happens. Whoever I lose, you have my promise, and this time I mean it the way you mean a promise you've already broken, and watch what breaking it costs. Hermione took his hand. She did not tell him he had done right. She did not tell him he had done wrong. She held his hand in the burning dark over the body of their teacher, and she said the only true thing there was to say, which was, then we make his death mean something. We end this. We get to Voldemort and we end it, the slow way, the real way forward, and we never let that thing in your chest convince you there's a shortcut again. And Harry held onto her hand and onto the vow and onto Fred Weasley alive at the tree line who would never know what he had cost. And somewhere under all of it the chorus sang its patient song, not angry, not defeated, merely patient, because it had all the time there was and the boy had only a life and lives in the end get tired. The vow was tested within the week and Harry kept it, and the keeping nearly killed him in a way no curse ever had. It was a small thing, that was the cruelty of the test, that it came not as a great tragedy but as an ordinary one. A man Harry barely knew, an order courier named Dawlish, who had turned at the last and chosen the right side, was caught on a road in Kent by a curse Harry reached 1/2 second too late to stop. He was nobody's brother. He was nobody Harry loved. He was simply a man who had done a brave thing and died for it, and the door behind Harry's ribs swung open the instant he fell, gentle and reasonable, the chorus murmuring its old murmur, only a half second. Only a half second back, no one you love. No tangle of fracture lines this time, surely a stranger on an empty road, one clean second, who would even feel the wake of it. Go back, you are fast enough. You have always been fast enough, he is right there. And Harry stood on the empty road with the dead man at his feet and did not move. It was the hardest stillness of his life, harder than letting Lupin die, because Lupin had been a single unbearable moment, and this was a choice he had to make over and over, second by second, while the door hung open and the chorus reasoned and the dead man's eyes stared at the Kentish sky. He could fix it. There were no Weasleys here to trade, no Tonks kneeling, no obvious balance for the universe to demand. It would be so easy, so clean, so nearly free. That was exactly why he could not do it. He understood, standing on the road, that the door did not need a tragedy to take him. It only needed him to decide once that a small enough rewrite was safe enough to make, and then the next one would be safer, and the next, and he would be back on the path he had sworn off over Lupin's body, the path that ended in a cracked and ringing world with the runner the only fixed thing left in it. So he kept the vow over a stranger, which was harder than keeping it over a friend, because a friend gave him a reason and a stranger gave him only the principle, and the principle had to be enough. He stood on the road until the chorus quieted, until the door swung shut, until the want had passed through him like a fever and left him shaking and gray and intact. Then he carried Dawlish's body home the slow way on foot, and he told Hermione what had happened, all of it, the want and the keeping both. That's the one I was afraid of, she said quietly when he finished. Not the big losses, you'll never rewrite Fred again, you've seen what it costs. It's the small ones, the strangers, the half seconds where it really does look free. She took his hand. But it's never free, Harry. The cost of the small ones isn't fracture lines. The cost is you a little more willing each time, the door a little easier to open, until one day it opens by itself. She held his eyes. You just paid that cost in reverse. You spent something keeping it shut. I don't know what to call the thing you spent, but I know it was real, and I know it was the bravest thing you've done since the night you stood still, and I know there's a limit to how many times a person can spend it. She did not say the rest because she did not have to, that the chorus had all the time there was and would offer the door again and again and again over every stranger on every empty road for the rest of Harry's life, and that the war had to end before the offering finally found the one night Harry was too tired to refuse. The hardest part was George. Fred lived, and that was a joy that Harry could not share in because he alone in all the world knew what the joy had cost, and the cost had a face, and the face was Tonks's as she knelt over her husband's body in the dark. Harry carried the secret of it like a stone swallowed whole. Every time Fred laughed, and Fred laughed often now, irrepressibly, gloriously alive, Harry heard underneath it the silence where Remus Lupin's laugh should have been, and knew that he had chosen one over the other without choosing, that the trade had been made by his own hands in a moment he could not take back and would not now undo. He had saved his friend's brother. He had killed his friend. Both were true and both were his, and the world that contained Fred's laughter was a world he had built on Lupin's grave, and no one would ever know it but him. He thought about telling George, who had nearly lost his twin and did not know it, who treated his own survival of the night as ordinary luck. It would have been a relief, in the cowardly way that confession is always a relief, to set the stone down in someone else's hands, to be known, to be forgiven or condemned by someone other than himself. He did not do it. He understood, turning it over in the cold light of the days after, that telling George would only move the weight. The way going back for Fred had only moved the death, that the knowledge would not be lessened by being shared, only multiplied. A second person made to carry a grief that helped no one and saved no one and changed nothing except to spread the wound. So Harry kept it. He let George be lightly, ignorantly grateful. He let Fred be alive without the burden of knowing whose life had bought his own. And he carried the whole of it alone, which was its own small rewriting, a refusal to make others pay for his peace. The same discipline as standing still while Lupin died, learned now in the quieter and lonelier country of the heart. Hermione knew because Hermione always knew, and she found him in the orchard the third night and sat with him in the cold and did not try to lift the stone because she understood that some weights are not meant to be lifted, only witnessed. You're not going to tell them, she said. It was not a question. No, good, she drew her knees up, because it wouldn't be a kindness, Harry. It would feel like one, like honesty, like letting them in. But all it would do is teach Fred that he's living on borrowed time and teach George to look at his brother and see a debt. You'd be giving them your guilt to hold and calling it the truth. She was quiet a moment. The bravest thing you've done in this whole war isn't the running. It's the things you've decided to carry by yourself so that other people don't have to, the not doing, standing still and letting it land on you. She leaned her shoulder against his in the dark. Just don't carry it alone, carry it alone where it counts in front of them, but I'm here, Ron's here. You can set it down with us in the dark where it doesn't cost anyone anything, that's allowed, that's what we're for. And Harry in the cold orchard with the split black Bramley above them, set the stone down for 1 hour in the only safe place he had between the two people who had loved him before the speed and would love him after it, who asked nothing of his quickness and everything of his honesty. And then he picked it up again in the morning and carried it back into the warm, bright world where Fred was making jokes and George was laughing, and no one knew the price of the laughter but the boy who had paid it. And would go on paying it gladly for the rest of his life. 100 miles north, Lord Voldemort woke in the dark because his instruments were screaming. They were old things, the instruments silver and bone and darker materials, devices the unspeakables had built and the Dark Lord had stolen, tuned to the deep structure of the world, to the flows of magic and the turning of fate. He had set them watching for the boy's speed and they had never registered it because the boy's speed was not magic and left no magical wake. But tonight they screamed, every one of them, needles slamming against their stops, crystals cracking, and the thing they were screaming about was not speed, it was time. Voldemort rose and went among them and read them with the cold attention that was the truest thing about him, and what they told him made him go very still, stiller than the boy had ever made him go, because it was the one thing he had not predicted and the one thing that changed everything. The fabric of recent hours had been disturbed, torn and restitched. Somewhere to the south, in the last day, an event had been unmade and remade, a death cancelled, a death created, the books balanced by hand that had reached into the past and rewritten it. The instruments could not say what had been changed. They could only say that it had been that the world Voldemort now stood in was not quite the world that had been going to happen, that a seam had been cut and badly sewn and was ringing still with the damage. The boy could move through time. Voldemort sat with that for a long while in the screaming dark, and slowly, the way a great cold engine turns over, his understanding of the war reorganized itself around the new fact, and at the end of it he was, though no servant was near to see, almost reverent, in the way that only a mind like his could be reverent before a sufficiently large and dangerous idea. He had been wrong about the floor. He had thought the boy's limit was his body, the fuel, the furnace, the gray exhaustion that meant there was always a last one he could not save, and that was true as far as it went. But it was not the deepest truth because the boy had found a way around it. If the furnace ran out and the last one died, the boy could simply go back before the furnace was empty and save them after all. The hostages, the villages, the deserts of dead ground Voldemort had so carefully built, all of it was undone in principle by a child who could decline to accept any outcome he disliked and run back to author a better one. Except the instruments were screaming and a death had been created where one had been cancelled, which proved the rewriting was not free. Voldemort had spent 60 years learning that nothing was free, that every power had a price, and here was the price written in the cracked crystals and the slammed needles. The boy could change the past, but the change had awake the same as everything the boy did had awake. He had moved to death, not erased it. He had cut the world, and the world had not healed clean. And that Voldemort understood, and his red eyes brightened in the dark. That was the floor beneath the floor, not the boy's body. The boy's conscience, a child who could rewrite the past but could not do it cleanly, who learned every time he tried that he was trading one beloved life for another, would not keep doing it. A monster would. The boy was not a monster. That was his great weakness, the weakness Severus had named months ago, the kindness that was only a list of the people he could be made to die for. The boy would touch the door and be burned by it and swear it off. Voldemort would have wagered his immortality on it. And from that night forward, the boy would be fighting not only the war but the door, holding himself back from the one power that could make him truly unbeatable, because using it cost him the people he could not bear to trade. Bellatrix, Voldemort said to the dark, and somewhere in the house his most devoted servant stirred toward his voice. "On me what they took from the Department of Mysteries, the cache of hourglasses, the unspeakables work on the deep turning. I have changed my mind about how this ends." He looked at the screaming instruments, the cracked crystals, the ringing wound in the fabric of the recent world, and he smiled his terrible smile because he had been handed at last the shape of his victory. The boy will not let himself rewrite the world. He has learned it costs him what he loves. Very well, then I will rewrite it. I will take his own forbidden door and make it mine, and I will hold the whole of time hostage, and when the moment comes I will offer him a choice. Let me unmake the world or use the power he has sworn never to touch to stop me. The red eyes were bright as wounds. Either he breaks his vow and falls into the lightning and is lost, or he keeps it and watches me end everything, fast as he is, too principled to be fast enough. I do not need to outrun him, Bellatrix. I need only make the finish line, a thing he has promised himself he will never cross. And in the screaming dark, the Dark Lord began, with the patience of a thing that had made itself immortal, to learn the turning of time, while far to the south a grieving boy swore over a dead man's body never to touch the very power his enemy was even now reaching for, and the chorus sang on behind his ribs, patient, 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 for the night the two of them would meet at the one finish line neither could refuse. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The cost after he stopped rewriting, the speed began to take its price out of his body instead, and the price was higher than he had known there was money to pay. Hermione saw it first in the numbers because she had never stopped keeping the notebook. Through the winter she filled it with a record of his slow ruin, and she made him read it because she had learned that the only argument that ever reached Harry was an argument made of facts he could not refute. He was eating twice what he had eaten in the autumn and losing weight regardless. His hands shook now even on the days he did not run. The gray that had once taken days to lift took weeks and never quite lifted all the way. There was a thinness to him always now, a sense of a candle that had been burned at both ends so long that the wax was nearly gone. And the lightning, which he had taught himself to ground so carefully into the world, had begun to ground itself into him. That was the new thing, the frightening thing, and it started in February. He would run and stop and bleed off the charge the way he had learned, but a part of it would not leave, would turn inward instead of outward, would sink into his own nerves and burn there, a deep electric ache in the long bones and the base of the skull that did not fade. The furnace had begun to consume the house it was built in. The chorus, when he listened, was louder than it had ever been, no longer at the bottom of a well but right there, a constant presence behind his ribs, close as a second heartbeat, and on the worst nights he could no longer tell where Harry ended and the lightning began. "It's pulling you in," Hermione said. She had stopped pretending otherwise. "Every time you use it, a little more of you stays on the other side. The vision told you, every river comes to the sea. You're Harry, you're getting there. You're closer than you were in the autumn. I can see it in the numbers and I can see it in your face." Her voice was steady, which meant she was holding it steady with both hands. "You have to use it less. If I use it less, people die. And if you use it until there's nothing left of you, you die, and then everyone you would have saved dies too forever because there's no one else who can do what you do." She closed the notebook. "You're not a renewable resource, Harry. You keep acting like the only cost of your speed is the people you can't reach. But you're a cost. You, the fastest thing alive, is also the most finite thing alive, and you are spending yourself down to nothing, and somewhere your enemy is counting on it." She was right, and Harry knew she was right, and he could not stop. That was the cruelty of the season. The war was being lost faster than ever, the ministry wholly fallen now, Hogwarts itself under the Carrow's boot. The list and the profit growing longer every week, and every life Harry could reach was a life he could not in conscience decline to reach. And so he ran, and the lightning sank a little deeper into his bones each time, and he grew grayer and thinner, and the chorus grew louder, and he began, in the worst of the winter, to push the people he loved away. It was not cruelty. He told himself it was not cruelty, and mostly it was true. He pushed them away because Voldemort had taught him what the people he loved were worth as weapons against him. And because Fred alive at the tree line and Lupin dead beyond, it had taught him that loving someone in this war was the same as painting a target on them. And because the chorus had begun to whisper a new and reasonable poison. That he would be faster if he had less to lose, that the grief and the love and the fear were friction too, a drag on the runner, and that the purest version of him, the version that could finally save everyone, would be the version that had let go of everything the saving was for. He nearly believed it. He moved out of the burrow into a series of safe houses alone. He stopped answering Ginny's letters, not because he had stopped loving her, but because he had started, and the loving frightened him into the cold logic of distance. He saw Ron and Hermione only for the work. He told himself it made him sharper, lighter, faster, and on the cold days when the chorus was loudest it even felt true, and it was the closest he ever came to being lost, that winter of careful solitude, far closer than any battle ever brought him, because the chorus does not take the runners it loves by force. It takes them by getting them one reasonable step at a time to set down everything that might have called them home. What saved him was Ron and a fist. Ron tracked him to safe house in March. Harry never learned how. Later he suspected Hermione, and he did not knock. He kicked the door in, and he crossed the room and hit Harry in the face hard enough to put him on the floor. Then he stood over him, breathing hard, his ears red, his eyes wet, and he said, "There you are. Hello, remember me, remember any of us. Because you've been gone for 2 months, mate, you've been a ghost." And Hermione cries when she thinks I can't hear, and Ginny has stopped asking about you, and your hands shake like an old man's, and you're disappearing, Harry, you're actually disappearing, and the worst part, his voice cracked, is that you think you're doing it for us. You think pushing us off is some noble, some sacrifice. It's not. It's just you alone dying slow and telling yourself it's kindness. Harry lay on the floor with his lip bleeding, in the chorus, for once silent, startled into silence perhaps, by the one thing in the world it had no answer for, which was an ordinary boy who loved his friend enough to hit him. "It says I'd be faster," Harry heard himself say. "Without you, without caring about anyone. It says the love is friction, drag, that I'd be able to save everyone if I just let go of why." Ron crouched down. He was still crying, and he did not bother to hide it, and he took Harry by the front of the shirt, not gently. "Then it's a liar," he said. "Because the love isn't the drag, you great idiot. It's the engine. It's the only reason you've never let that thing have you. You think you'd run faster with nothing to run for. You'd stop. You'd lie down in the lightning and let it sing you to sleep because there'd be no reason left to come back. We're not slowing you down, Harry. We're the finish line. We're the thing you run to." He hauled Harry up to sitting. "So you're going to come home. You're going to eat at the table where people can see you. And the next time that thing tells you you'd be better off alone, you're going to remember that the fastest you've ever moved in your life was the night you carried 6 people out of a burning house one at a time because you loved them, and the slowest you've ever been was right now, sitting alone in a cold room listening to a voice that wants you dead." It was the truest thing anyone said to Harry in the whole long war, and it came from Ron Weasley, who had spent his life being told he was the least remarkable of his brothers, and who turned out in the end to understand the most important thing in the world better than the fastest mind alive ever had, that you cannot outrun the dark by leaving behind the light you are running toward. Harry went home. Voldemort let him have the spring to heal, and then in April he closed the trap he had been building all winter, and Harry lost for the first time. It was elegant, the way all of Voldemort's work was elegant. He did not attack Harry, he attacked geography. On the same night, at the same hour, three places that Harry loved came under assault at once. The Burrow, where the Weasleys had rebuilt and returned, a safe house in London where 24 Muggle-born refugees were sheltering children among them, and Hogwarts itself, where the students who had stayed to resist the Carrows had barricaded themselves into the 7th floor and sent up a distress that lit the northern sky. 3 places, hundreds of miles apart. All 3 under the knife at once, and one boy, however fast, who could only be in one place at a time, arriving and departing in sequence with a furnace that had a floor. Harry understood at the moment the calls came in, the whole cruel architecture of it laid out in the stillness behind his eyes. It was Ottery catchable again, the desert again, but built continental-wide and 3-pronged, designed not to be solved but to be chosen among, designed so that wherever he went first, the other 2 would be the places where he was too late, and so that getting to all 3 would burn him down to the gray and beyond it. Voldemort had not made a battle. He had made a sum that did not add up and handed Harry the bill. He ran anyway, of course he ran. There was never any version where he did not run. He took the refugees first because there were children and because London was closest, and he emptied the safe house in 11 trips through the stillness. 24 people carried one at a time out of a building already burning, out from under curses already falling, and it cost him God. It cost him the grey coming on before he was half done, the lightning beginning its inward burn, the chorus roaring its delight at the spending. But he got them. All 24. He set the last child down in a Muggle park 3 streets away and did not stop to breathe, because the Burrow was burning 100 miles north and he could feel the clock of it ticking in his bones. The Burrow he saved too, but not whole. He arrived gray and shaking and slower than he had ever been in a fight, and the Death Eaters there were ready for a slow Harry, ready in a way they had never been before. Snape's intelligence. He would understand later, the careful true reports of exactly how spent the boy would be by the time he reached his second emergency of the night. They had set the kind of trap that did not need aim, a perimeter of cursed fire that closed as he tried to cross it, area denial that he had to spend precious seconds and precious fuel tearing through, and behind it Bellatrix Lestrange, who had spent the whole war studying him, who had watched every report of every tactic and built herself into the one duelist in the world prepared to fight a thing that moved faster than thought. She could not hit him. No one could hit him. But she did not try to hit him. She had learned better than that. She fought space, she fought the places he would have to be, filled the air with curses not aimed at Harry but aimed at the people he was trying to reach, so that every life he saved he had to save through a storm of her making, each one costing double, triple the fuel pouring out of him. And while he spent himself saving the Weasleys from the deaths she scattered in his path, she laughed and she watched him gray and she waited for the floor. He found it halfway through carrying Mr. Weasley clear, the furnace guttered. The speed died in his hands like a flame pinched out, and Harry came out of the stillness mid-stride into the full roaring speed of the real world with 100 yards still to cross and nothing left to cross it with. And a curse from Bellatrix's wand caught him across the side, not a killing curse. She was too clever for that. She wanted him alive and broken, a curse that opened him from hip to ribs and put him down in the burning grass of the orchard, bleeding, spent, slow. An ordinary wounded boy for the first time since the night on the bike. It was the first time he had ever been hurt in a fight. He had forgotten it was possible. He lay in the grass with his side laid open and the grey roaring in his ears and Bellatrix walking toward him through the cursed fire, unhurried, delighted, and for one moment the whole war hung on whether the fastest thing alive could get back to his feet, and he could not. What saved his life was the Weasleys and Hogwarts, and the simple fact that Voldemort's sum had a flaw. The third prong, Hogwarts, had not waited to be rescued. The students on the 7th floor, leaderless, abandoned, with no guardian coming, had done the thing Voldemort's arithmetic had not accounted for. They had fought. Neville Longbottom had led them down off the 7th floor into the corridors, and Luna Lovegood had raised the old coins of Dumbledore's army. And the resistance Harry had spent the winter trying to protect had turned out not to need protecting so much as permission, and they had broken the Carrows' hold on the school in a running battle that pulled Death Eaters north to contain it, including, at the critical moment, the reinforcements Bellatrix had been counting on at the Burrow. So Bellatrix, standing over a bleeding boy in a burning orchard with the war in her hands, looked up at the sound of her support disapparating north to deal with a school full of children who would not lie down, and made the only mistake she made all night. She hesitated. And Ron and Hermione, who had been fighting their way across the orchard the whole time, reached Harry in the half-second her hesitation bought, and Hermione threw up a shield and Ron threw everything he had, and they dragged Harry back through the cursed fire by the arms, leaving a smear of his blood across the grass, and got him out. They retreated. For the first time in the war, Harry Potter ran from a fight, carried from it, rather, bleeding and gray and broken, by the 2 friends who had refused to let him face it alone. The Burrow burned. They did not save it. They saved the Weasleys, most of them, and the refugees, all of them, and the school saved itself. But the burrow burned to the ground that night, the warm, crooked heart of everything Harry was fighting for, and as Hermione's disapparition took them away into the dark, the last thing Harry saw was the home where he had learned what a home was, going up in flame against the spring sky. And Bellatrix, standing in the ruins, had taken something with her. Not Harry, she had not been able to take Harry. But in the chaos of the retreat, in the half-second of confusion as the resistance pulled the Death Eaters north, she had reached into the fleeing crowd and closed her hand on the one prize that would hurt the boy more than his own capture and disapparated with it before anyone could stop her. It was 3 days before Harry was conscious enough to be told. It was Ginny who was gone. Bellatrix had taken Ginny. He went into the Speed Force on the 3rd night, and this time he did not come back the same. It was the wound that did it, or the wound and the grief together. Ginny taken, the burrow ash, his own side laid open and stitched by Hermione's shaking hands, the lightning burning inward through nerves that no longer had the strength to ground it. He lay in a borrowed bed in a borrowed house, and the charge he could not shed turned on him at last, all of it at once, the months of inward burn coming due in a single night, and the chorus rose up around him not as a whisper now but as a flood, and Harry felt himself coming loose from his own body the way a tooth comes loose by degrees and then all at once. He did not run anywhere. That was the terror of it. He was lying perfectly still, and the speed took him anyway, reached up through the wound and the exhaustion and simply pulled, and the borrowed room peeled away and Harry fell not forward, not back, but down through the floor of the world into the country with no floor, deeper than he had ever gone, past the cathedrals of moving light and into the heart of the lightning itself. It was vast beyond any vastness he had words for. He had thought before that he had seen the Speed Force. He understood now that he had stood at its shore and dipped a hand. This was the deep of it, the place where the runners went when they were spent, and it was made of them, of all of them, every fast thing that had ever lived and given itself to the speed dissolved now into the current 10,010,000,000, a chorus that was not a metaphor but a literal congregation of the lost, singing, running forever with no bodies and no names and no way home. He could feel them recognizing him. He could feel them welcoming him. He could feel how easy it would be to join them. Easier than anything, easier than breathing, the simplest thing in the world, to stop holding the shape called Harry and let it dissolve into the bright running flood and never be tired again, never be too slow again, never lose anyone again because there would be no one left to lose. Only the speed, only the run, only the endless luminous now. And the deep of the Speed Force spoke to him, not the chorus this time, but the thing the chorus was made of, the vast and ancient self of it, and it told him the last truth, the one it had been saving, the one it had wanted him whole and spent and grieving enough to finally hear. You are not borrowing us, child, you never were. The speed is not a power that came to you. It is a place you came from and a place you are returning to, and the running has only ever been the long way home. Every runner believes at first that the speed is a thing they use. Every runner learns at last that they are a thing the speed is using, a hand it puts out into the world of slow and heavy things, to touch them, to taste them, to remember through them what it was to be small and afraid and to love something that could be lost. You are our newest hand, and you are nearly spent, and when you are spent we will draw you in and you will be us, and it will not be death, it will be the opposite of death. It will be the end of ever being too slow. But know this, because you have earned the knowing, there is one more run in you. One, the wound and the grief and the inward burn have spent you nearly to nothing, and what is left will buy you a single run, the fastest of your life, faster than any runner has gone since the first of us, and at the end of it there will be nothing left at all. You will not gray, you will not fall down and rise again. You will run that last run and you will arrive, and then you will dissolve here with us into the light forever. That is the price now, not your shoes, not your hunger, yourself entire. One last run and then home. Spend it well, hand of hours. Spend it on something worth the whole of you, and then come home and run with us and be tired no more. Harry hung in the deep of the lightning, dissolving, one breath from gone, and he understood that the thing was not lying and had never lied, that this was simply the truth of what he was and had always been, a finger the universe's fastest thing had put out into the slow world, nearly worn through now from touching too much. And the welcome was so warm, and the rest was so near. And there was no Ginny here, and no Ron, and no Hermione, and no war, and no grief, and no half-second too slow, only the run, only the light, only home. He thought of Ron's fist. He thought of the engine and the finish line. He thought, not yet, not yet. There's a girl in the dark and a war to end and one run left to spend, and I will not dissolve into your light 1 hour before I have spent the last of me on the only thing it was ever for. He turned. In the deep of the Speed Force, where turning was the same as choosing, Harry turned away from the welcome and the warmth and the endless luminous rest, and he reached up through the floor of the world toward the borrowed room and the borrowed bed and the wound and the grief and the people who were waiting for him, and he climbed hand over hand against the current of his own homecoming. The hardest thing he ever did, harder than standing still while Lupin died, harder than carrying 6 people out of a burning house. And he dragged the shape called Harry back up out of the light and into the small and aching world. He woke screaming, and Hermione was there and Ron was there, and his side was bleeding through the stitches, and he was alive and he was changed. The change was this: he was slower now. The deep of the Speed Force had taken its toll for the visit, and when Harry reached for the stillness in the days that followed, it came reluctant and thin, a fraction of what it had been. He could still drop into the amber. He could still cross a room before a wand rose. But the great impossible feats of the autumn, emptying a building in 11 trips, running England in 3 heartbeats, were beyond him now, would spend him to the grey in a single use. He had one run left in him. He believed it utterly because the deep of the force had told him and the deep of the force did not lie. One last run, the fastest of his life, and then nothing. And instead of mourning it, Harry felt, for the first time since the bike, something settle in him that was almost peace. Because a power without a limit is a temptation without a floor, and that had been the whole danger from the beginning, the chorus whispering more, the door of time hanging open, the endless reasonable seductions of a boy who could always do a little more if he was only willing to spend a little more of himself. But a single run changed the arithmetic entirely. He could not spend himself a little at a time anymore, could not be bled down across 1,000 small mercies into the lightning. He had exactly one payment left to make, all at once, and he got to choose what to buy with it. The limit was not a loss. The limit was a clarity. For the first time in the whole long war, he knew precisely what his speed was worth and precisely how much of it remained. And he understood that the question was no longer how fast can I go, but the only question that had ever really mattered, the one Hermione had been asking since the first morning in the orchard: what is worth the whole of me? One run, he told them in the gray morning, his side healing, his voice steady. That's what's left, the Force told me, and it doesn't lie about this. I've got one run in me, the fastest I'll ever go, faster than anything's ever gone, and when I spend it, that's the end of the speed of me. Maybe I dissolve into the light and I don't come back. He looked at Ron and at Hermione, and he was not afraid, and that was the change in him. That was the thing the deep of the Force had given him in exchange for what it took. So we make it count. We don't waste it on a raid or a rescue or one more burning street. We spend it on the war. The whole war, we get to Voldemort, we get Ginny back, and we end it, all of it, in one run, because one run is all I've got, and one run, if I spend it right, is all it'll take. Hermione was crying, and she did not pretend otherwise, and she reached out and took his hand, sparks and all, the way she had 100 times. Then we plan it, she said, properly. Every second of it before you spend a single one, because you only get the one and there's no going back to fix it. She wiped her eyes. What's the run, Harry? What does it look like, the run that ends the war? And Harry Potter, slower now, mortal now, one payment from the light and clearer than he had ever been in his life, began at last to plan the fastest thing that anyone had ever done. It was Snape who told them about the anchor in the only way a man on a wire could tell them anything, which was sideways and at terrible risk. The message reached Hermione 3 days after the burrow burned, while Harry still lay gray and stitched and barely conscious. A single line of cramped writing inside a delivery of dittany and blood-replenishing potion that arrived from a supplier the Order had thought was ministry-controlled, which meant someone had bent the ministry's own supply lines to slip it through. Hermione recognized the hand. She had seen it on 100 potions essays, bled red with contempt, and she nearly missed the message entirely because it was written in the margin of an invoice as though it were a note about stock, and it said only, "He builds an engine from the unspeakable's our work. It does not move time, it holds it. While it turns, the present cannot be left, and what cannot be left cannot be unmade. The boy's door will be shut. Plan for a fight with no speed in it. Burn this." She did not burn it. She copied it first, in case she needed to prove to a doubting Order that the warning was real, and then she burned it, and then she sat for a long time in the cold with the worst piece of good news she had ever received. Good news because it was a warning, and a warning was a chance. Worst because it confirmed the thing she had feared since the night Voldemort's instruments first felt Harry cross time, that the Dark Lord had stopped trying to beat the speed and started trying to remove it, and that he had found in the unspeakable's forbidden work a way to do it. She understood at once what it meant for any rescue, any assault, any final confrontation. They could not send Harry into a room with that engine and expect his speed to save him, because his speed would not be there. They would have to plan a battle the way ordinary people planned battles, with position and timing and sacrifice, and the slow, brave arithmetic of people who could not move faster than thought, and they would have to make Harry, who had spent a year forgetting how to be slow, remember. "He's telling us how to win," she said to Ron in the cold, turning the copied line over. "Snape, whatever he is, whoever he's really working for, he's just handed us the shape of the trap weeks before we walk into it. Voldemort thinks the anchor is a secret. It is, we know, and knowing it's coming is the only advantage we're going to get, because everything else about that room is built to take our advantages away." She looked toward the room where Harry lay healing. "We can't outspeed it, so we plan for no speed. We plan the whole thing assuming Harry's just a clever, tired boy in a room full of enemies, and if that version of the plan wins, then the speed, whatever's left of it, is a bonus instead of a crutch." It was the coldest and best planning the Resistance ever did, and it began 3 days after the burrow burned, around a kitchen table over a copied line of a spy's handwriting, the slow human work that would, in the end, matter more than all the lightning, because it accounted for the day the lightning would not come. Ginny Weasley spent her captivity refusing to be afraid where anyone could see it, which was its own kind of speed, the quickness it takes to bury a thing before it shows on your face. They held her at Malfoy Manor in a cell that had been a wine cellar, and they did not hurt her, which frightened her more than hurting would have, because it meant she was being kept for something. Bellatrix came down twice a day to look at her through the bars with a hunger that had nothing human in it, turning her wand over in her fingers, and said nothing and went away, and the silence of it was worse than any curse. Ginny understood that she was not a prisoner, she was bait. She had been taken not for anything she knew or anything she was, but for what she was to Harry, and the knowledge sat in her like a stone, because it meant that her own value in this war had been reduced to a single equation: how far the fastest boy alive would run and how much he would spend to reach her. She decided in the dark of the wine cellar that she would not let that be true. If they were going to use her love for Harry as a leash on him, then she would do the one thing they had not accounted for. She would stop being a thing that needed saving. She did not yet know how. But she had grown up in a house full of people who ran toward danger instead of away from it, and she had led an army of children against the Carrows with nothing but coins and nerve, and she was not, whatever Bellatrix thought, the soft center of Harry Potter waiting to be squeezed. She was a Weasley. She would find the crack in this, and she would widen it. Upstairs, Lord Voldemort stood over the thing he had built all winter and was pleased. It sat in the Manor's great drawing room where the long table had been cleared away. A structure of brass and crystal and slow-turning rings, hourglasses without number nested one inside another, the whole apparatus drawn from the Unspeakable's deepest and most forbidden work, and rebuilt by Bellatrix's hands under his exact direction. The Department of Mysteries had been studying time for 100 years, carefully, fearfully, in increments no larger than an hour, and Voldemort had taken their century of caution and inverted it, had built from their safe small turnings a thing that turned the other way, that did not send a single traveler back a single hour, but instead reached into the foundation of time itself and gripped it. He called it privately the anchor because it did not move through time. It held time still. And what it held it could break. "Explain it to me again," he said to the captured Unspeakable kneeling beside it, the wretched man whose knowledge he had taken whole and whose body he kept only as a convenience. "The boy moves through time. He has run backward. My instruments felt it. When he comes for the girl, and he will come, he will try to run past me into the moment before to undo whatever I do. Tell me again why he cannot." "Because the anchor fixes the present, my lord." The Unspeakable's voice was a husk. "While it turns, this moment, this exact moment, is welded to the foundation of time. It cannot be rewritten because it cannot be left. The boy can run as fast as he likes. He cannot run to yesterday that the anchor will not release. You have taken away his door." The man swallowed. "And there is the other thing. The anchor does not only hold the present. If it is broken, if its turning is stopped by force, it does not simply fail. It releases all the time it was holding at once uncontrolled. Every welded moment comes loose in the same instant. The past and the present and the futures that might have been all collapsed together. It would be," he closed his eyes, "the end of sequence. The end of before and after. The end of the world, my lord, not in fire, but in a single moment that never finishes happening." "Yes," said Voldemort softly, and there was something close to joy in it. "That is the part I like." Because he understood now the shape of the trap he had finally built, and it was a trap with no exit, the first he had ever devised that the boy's impossible speed could not simply step around. He would hold the girl and the boy would come, fast as light, faster, and find the present welded shut, the door of time closed against him. No yesterday to run to, no rewrite to undo whatever Voldemort chose to do. And if the boy, cornered, tried to destroy the anchor, tried to break the thing that held time still, the way the boy broke everything with speed and force and that maddening cleverness, then he would not free himself. He would end the world. The boy would face a choice with no good answer. Accept whatever Voldemort did in the welded present, including the girl's death and his own, with no power to undo it, or break the anchor and unmake everything, all of time collapsing into a single endless instant, to deny Voldemort a victory that would no longer matter because there would be no one left to whom anything could matter. "He is fast," Voldemort murmured, looking into the slow-turning crystal heart of the anchor. "He is the fastest thing that has ever lived. I have never doubted it, and I have never needed to beat it. I needed only to build a finish line that his speed could not help him cross, a moment he cannot run out of, a door he cannot open, a choice between a death he cannot prevent and an ending he cannot survive causing." He turned to Bellatrix, who stood in the shadows drinking in his certainty like wine. "Bring the boy to me when he comes. Do not try to stop him on the way. You cannot, and the trying only spends my servants. Let him come as fast as he can. The faster he runs, Bellatrix, the harder he strikes the wall I have built, and the wall does not break." The red eyes glittered. "Speed was never the question. I have spent a year teaching the boy the answer, one death at a time. The question is what he will not do. And I have built him a room in which the only way to win is to do the one thing he has sworn never to do again, and the only way to keep his vow is to lose everything. Either way, Bellatrix, he is mine. Bring me the fastest thing alive, and I will show it the one place it cannot run." And down in the dark of the wine cellar, Ginny Weasley pressed her ear to a crack in the old stone, and listened to the muffled certainty in the voices above, and caught the word anchor and the word choice, and understood enough to be more afraid than she had let herself be since they took her, not for herself, but for Harry, who would come, who would always come, running as fast as he could straight into a wall built precisely to break the fastest thing alive. "Then I'll have to make sure he doesn't have to choose," she thought in the dark, with a Weasley stubbornness and an army leader's nerve. "I'll have to be the crack in it. I'll have to be the thing the Dark Lord didn't count on." She did not yet know how. But she began in the cellar dark to plan her own small run, and 100 miles away in a borrowed room Harry began to plan his great one. And the two of them, who loved each other across a distance neither could yet cross, bent their separate stubbornness toward the same locked room and the same turning anchor and the same impossible finish line, where the whole war waited to be decided in the space between 2 seconds. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The War in Seconds. They spent 3 weeks planning a thing that would take Harry 90 seconds to do. That was the strange new mathematics of the run, and Hermione ran it like a general staff officer because she had understood before any of them that Harry's last run could not be improvised. He had won. He could not stop in the middle to think, could not drop out and recover and try again, could not afford a single wasted yard, because every yard was a measure of the only fuel he had left and there was exactly enough of it to win the war once and no more. So they did the thinking in advance, all of it, every second. Weeks of slow human deliberation poured into a plan that Harry would execute in a single sprint faster than light. They turned the war into a sequence of instants, and they solved each instant on paper in the cold with maps and lists and the merciless arithmetic of who could be reached and who could not, so that when the moment came Harry would not have to choose. He would only have to run. The shape of it was this. Voldemort could not be killed while his Horcruxes stood. Hermione had pried that truth out of a year of research in a stolen book, and the things Harry's scar had shown him in the worst of his nights, and so the war could not be ended by reaching Voldemort first. It had to be ended in the right order, the Horcruxes first and then the man, all in the single unbroken run, because the moment Harry struck the first of them Voldemort would know, and the window between the first blow and the last would be the only window there ever was. They located them the slow way over those 3 weeks, with the Order's whole strength bent to it, the cup in a vault, the diadem in a castle, the locket recovered, the snake at the Dark Lord's side. 4 things hidden across Britain, and a 5th thing, the girl in a cellar at Malfoy Manor, and a 6th thing, the man himself, waiting in the drawing room above her beside an engine that could break the world. You hit them in this order, Hermione said on the last night, laying the map flat. She had drawn the run on it in red, a single unbroken line that crossed the whole country and came back, a scribble that looked like a child's drawing and was in fact the most carefully reasoned object in the history of the Resistance. The locket, we have it, it's easiest, you start there to find your speed. Then the cup, then the diadem, then you converge on the manor. The snake and the man are last together because they're in the same room, and because the snake is the one he keeps closest and the one he'll defend, and you cannot give him time to understand what's happening. The whole thing has to land inside the window where he knows he's under attack but hasn't yet worked out the shape of it. From the first Horcrux to the last, you cannot stop. If you stop, he adapts, and if he adapts, you lose, because the one thing he's better at than anyone alive is adapting. She looked up at him. We've timed it, with the route, with the destruction at each one. It's about 90 seconds of your time, maybe less. 90 seconds to end a war. Her voice did not shake. Spend them well. The team would be his eyes again, scattered across the country at each site, holding vantages, ready to confirm a kill or call a complication into the coins the instant Harry needed it, because even in his last run he could not perceive the whole board alone, and the slow, steady watchers at the edges were worth more than any speed. Ron would be at the manor, so would Hermione. So would what was left of the Order and Dumbledore's army, gathered for the one assault that mattered, ready to take the slow world share of the fight while Harry took the fast one. They would not be able to help him inside the 90 seconds. But they could make sure the 90 seconds happened, could break the manor's wards, draw the Death Eater's fire, hold the doors, and they could be there at the finish line, which Ron had taught him was the thing that mattered most. Harry stood over the map with the red line on it and the chorus quiet behind his ribs, quieter than it had been in a year, because there was nothing left in him for it to want. He was already spent down to the single coin of the last run, and a thing that has only one coin left cannot be tempted to spend it carelessly. He looked at the line that crossed the whole country and came home, and he was not afraid, and he understood that the not being afraid was the gift the deep of the Force had given him in exchange for everything it had taken. One more thing, he said. Ginny. She's in the plan, Hermione said. The manor, we get her out in the assault before you ever reach the drawing room. No, Harry shook his head. I don't mean the plan, I mean if it goes wrong. If the last run is the cost, if I don't, he could not say it and did not need to, they had all known the shape of it for weeks. If I dissolve into the light at the end of it, I need you to tell her something. He took a breath. Tell her she was right about the not doing mattering more than the running. Tell her the fastest I ever moved was carrying people out of a fire because I loved them, and the best thing I ever did was stand still and let it cost me because I loved the whole world more than I loved being the one who saved it. Tell her, his voice caught, tell her I ran the last one toward her, whatever else it was for. Tell her I was always running toward her. Hermione was crying. Ron put a hand on Harry's shoulder and gripped it hard and did not trust himself to speak. And the 3 of them stood over the red line on the map in the last quiet hour before the run that would end the war, and were for that hour simply what they had always been underneath the speed and the war and the cosmic terrible weight of it. 3 friends who had found each other young and loved each other through the worst thing that had ever happened to any of them and would, whatever the morning cost, have done it all again. They struck at dawn. The locket was in a ministry vault that the Order had bled to reach, and Harry destroyed it first because it was the surest, and because he needed the first kill to find the new shape of his diminished speed before he wagered the war on it. He dropped into the stillness, and it came thin, reluctant, a fraction of the autumn's flood, but it came in, the world poured into amber, and Harry looked, for what he knew might be one of the last times, at the frozen, silent beauty of a world that had stopped to let him pass. A dust mote hung in a shaft of vault light. Ron beside him was a statue with his mouth half open on a word of encouragement. And Harry took the cursed thing in his hand, and the basilisk fang Hermione had pressed on him in his other, and he drove the fang through the locket in a motion that, to the frozen world, was faster than seeing, and felt the Horcrux die, a small foul shriek at the edge of the stillness, a piece of Voldemort's soul guttering out. 1. He came out of the stillness with the locket dead in his hand and the gray already touching the edges of him, sooner than it would have a year ago because he had so little now to spend. Ron's word of encouragement finished arriving. "It Harry, that's," and then Ron saw the dead locket and his face changed and Harry was already gone. Because here was the thing about the run, the thing they had planned for 3 weeks and Harry now lived, he could not stop. The moment the first Horcrux died, the clock that Hermione had drawn on the map began to run. And the only way to beat it was to never once pause, to cross the country from kill to kill in a single unbroken sprint, faster than Voldemort could understand what was happening to him. So Harry ran out of the vault, up through the Ministry into the grey London dawn, and then north and west across the whole of Britain toward the second of the dark things. And the country unspooled around him in streaks of frozen light, fields and motorways and sleeping towns all hanging motionless in the amber as the fastest thing alive spent the second to last of itself on the longest run of his life. The cup was in a hillside vault in the north, behind a dragon and 100 curses, and the Order had spent lives to crack it open ahead of him so that Harry would not have to. He arrived in the stillness, and there were people there, the assault team frozen mid-battle, a curse hanging in the air a foot from a young witch's face, and Harry in the scene between seconds with the gray rising and the clock running and the whole war balanced on his not stopping, made the choice they had planned for and dreaded, the choice that was the cold, cruel heart of the run. He did not save her, he could have. He had time in the stillness to cross the cavern and put a stone between the curse and the girl's face, the way he had saved 19 in a burning street. But saving her would cost him a yard, a measure of fuel, a fraction of the single coin he had left, and the run had no slack in it, no margin, nothing to spare. Hermione had timed it to the inch, and there was exactly enough of him to kill the Horcruxes and reach Voldemort, and not 1 yard more. To save the girl was to come up short at the manor. To save the girl was to let the war go on and 100 more girls die in it for the one he could see. He had learned this arithmetic in a burning street with a child in his arms, and he had sworn over Lupin's body to live by the not doing, and now the not doing came due in the cruelest form it had ever taken. Harry took the cup. He drove the fang through it. He felt the second piece of soul shriek and die. And he ran on out of the cavern, leaving a young witch frozen a foot from a curse he had the speed to stop and not the fuel to survive stopping. And behind him, when the world let go, she would fall, and the assault team would not understand why the guardian who had passed close enough to touch her had not reached out his hand. Wind off the northern sea could not have been colder than Harry was in that instant, and he carried her after among all the others he carried, the ledger of the run, the dead he bought the world with. The price of a war ended in 90 seconds that was paid, as every price in this war had always been paid, by people who never knew their names had been written into the sum. 2. The diadem was at Hogwarts in a room that hid itself, and the castle was where the war's two halves finally crashed together. Harry had not been back to Hogwarts since the speed woke, and he came to it now at the end of the longest run of his life. The grey roaring in his ears, 2 pieces of his enemy's soul dead behind him, and the clock Hermione had drawn ticking down the narrow window of his victory. He came over the mountains and down through the wards, torn open ahead of him by the Order's diversion, the whole resistance throwing itself at the castle to pull Voldemort's attention north while Harry did the real work, and he dropped into the stillness in the room of requirement and found the diadem among a mountain of 1,000 years of hidden things, and he drove the fang through it, and the third soul piece shrieked and died. 3. But Hogwarts was not a vault, and Hogwarts did not hold still for him the way the empty places had. The castle was full of the resistance, full of Death Eaters, full of a running battle that had begun the moment the Order struck, and as Harry came out of the stillness with the dead diadem in his hand, the grey took him harder than it ever had, and for one terrible moment the speed guttered entirely, and he was just a boy standing in a burning castle with a war happening around him at a speed he could not meet. He had spent too much. The run across Britain, 3 Horcruxes, the not saving that had cost him as much as any saving. He was nearly empty with the worst of it still ahead, and he leaned against the wall of the room of requirement and felt the floor of himself coming up fast. The chorus behind his ribs stirred. 1 run left, it reminded him gently, lovingly. You have spent the country crossing it. What remains will buy you the manor, the snake, the man barely, and then home. Do not falter here. Do not waste the last of yourself standing still in a hallway. Spend it on the finish. Come to us clean. Harry pushed off the wall and ran. He did not fight the battle in the castle. That was the hardest not doing of all, harder than the witch in the cavern, to run through the halls of the school he loved while the people he loved fought and fell in them, and not stop, not save a single one, because the war did not end in this castle. The war ended at Malfoy Manor, and every yard he spent here was a yard he would not have there. He passed Neville dueling 2 Death Eaters on a moving staircase. He passed a knot of 4th years he had taught, fighting back to back. He passed Kingsley and Professor McGonagall and a dozen faces he knew, all of them frozen in the amber of his passage, all of them in danger. All of them beyond his help because his help was promised elsewhere, and there was exactly enough of it to keep the promise once. He ran through the whole burning, beloved length of Hogwarts and out the far side and did not save one single life. And it was the coldest thing he ever did, and it was the discipline a year of grief had carved into him. And Voldemort, who had built his entire strategy on the belief that the boy would always stop to save the person in front of him, had not planned for Harry, who had learned at last to run past the people he loved toward the war that would save them all. He turned south toward Wiltshire, toward the manor, toward the end, 3 soul pieces dead, the snake and the man and the girl ahead, and the grey rising, the last of the furnace burning down toward the single coin of the final run. The team held the country together while Harry ran across it, and that was a thing no one ever wrote into the songs because the songs were about the boy and not about the Watchers, and the Watchers were the reason the boy survived. He could not see the whole board. He had never been able to, not since the burning street. The speed lived in the seam between seconds and gave him no time inside that seam to lift his head and survey a continent. So at each sight the team became his eyes, exactly as Hermione had built them to be in the autumn, scaled now to the size of the final run. Luna Lovegood stood in the ministry vault where the locket lay and called the room clean into a coin before Harry arrived, so that he did not waste a yard checking for threats that were not there. Neville Longbottom held the mouth of the northern cavern where the cup was hidden and called the curses in the order they would fall, a slow, steady voice in the dark, naming a battlefield for a boy who would cross it faster than the naming. At Hogwarts, McGonagall herself marshaled the corridors, so that when Harry came through the room of requirement the path to the far side of the castle had been swept and called and held by people who could perceive the whole of a fight in a way the fastest thing alive never could. They could not run with him. But they could think for him in advance in the slow world, and pour that thinking into the coins so that Harry, dropping in and out of the stillness, executed a plan a dozen minds had built and no single mind could have held. It was the lesson of the whole war made into a method, that the speed was a single hand, and a hand is blind, and it takes a body full of eyes to aim it true. Harry crossed Britain in the longest run of his life, and at every step of it he was not alone, because 100 people who could not move faster than thought had arranged themselves around the country to be his sight, his memory, his judgment, to be the slow and steady frame that the impossible quick thing could hang itself upon and not fly apart. And it cost them, too, that frame. Not every watcher at every sight lived to call the next room. The northern cavern had been opened at a price, and the price went on being paid while Harry ran, and the witch he passed frozen a foot from a curse was only the one death he saw. There were others he never saw at all, watchers who fell holding a vantage so that the boy would have his eyes a heartbeat longer. He learned their names afterward, all of them, because Hermione kept the notebook to the end and made him read it, and because a run won on the backs of the slow, and the steady is a run that owes them the dignity of being counted. The fastest thing alive crossed a continent in 90 seconds. It took 10,000 slow human hours, and more lives than anyone wanted to number, to make those 90 seconds possible, and Harry, who had once believed his speed made him the whole of the war, ended at understanding that his speed had only ever been the smallest and least important part of why the war was won. 100 miles south in the drawing room of Malfoy Manor, Lord Voldemort felt his own soul dying piece by piece and smiled, because it meant the boy had finally come. He had known he would feel it. He had spent the winter learning the deep turning of time and the deeper architecture of his own divided soul, and he had tuned himself to the Horcruxes the way a spider tunes itself to a web, so that when the first of them died he felt it as a plucked thread, a small fowl snapped somewhere to the north, the locket going dark, a piece of himself that had been hidden in a vault simply ceasing. A lesser man would have panicked. Voldemort sat in his high chair beside the turning anchor and the bound girl and the coiled snake, and he counted the locket. Then, hardly any time later, far too little time, a span no traveler could have crossed by any ordinary means, the cup, a second thread snapping in the north. Then the diadem, a third at Hogwarts, where his instruments told him a battle had begun. 3 pieces of his immortality dying in the space of a single held breath, faster than news could travel, faster than thought, in an order so precise it could only be a plan, and Lord Voldemort understood, with the cold clarity that was the truest thing about him, that the boy was not raiding his Horcruxes one by one across a campaign of weeks. The boy was destroying all of them at once, in a single run, threading the whole country on one unbroken sprint, ending the war in the time it took to cross a room. It should have frightened him. It did not, and the not being frightened was the measure of how completely he had prepared. He had built for exactly this. He had assumed from the start that the boy, once committed, would come fast, faster than defenses, faster than warning, faster than any counter that depended on speed, and so he had built a counter that did not depend on speed at all. He reached out and laid one long white hand on the brass and crystal of the anchor, and he began to turn it in earnest, and he felt the present begin to weld itself shut around him, this moment fixing itself to the foundation of time, the door of yesterday closing. "He is coming," Voldemort said to Bellatrix in the shadows, to the bound girl, to the kneeling unspeakable, to the room he had spent a year shaping into a trap. 3 of my anchors to this world are already gone. He is faster than I dared hope, which means he is spending himself faster than he knows, which means he will arrive at the end of the longest run of his life already half-emptied, already gray, already standing on the floor of himself. Good, let him. He turned the anchor another degree, and the air in the room grew thick and still and certain, time setting like cooling glass. Every Horcrux he destroys brings him closer, and the closer he comes the more he spends, and the more he spends the less he will have when he reaches the one room where spending does not help. I have not tried to slow him, Bellatrix, I have done the opposite. I have made the path to me clear and quick and irresistible so that he runs it as fast as he possibly can and arrives at the finish with nothing left in a room where I have taken away the only thing he has ever been. Bellatrix watched her master turn the engine, her eyes bright with the worship that was the whole of her, and asked the question she was permitted to ask. "And the last piece, my lord, the one you keep here, turns in the heart of the anchor," said Voldemort, "where he cannot reach it without ending the world. He will kill the snake, perhaps. He will kill every servant between the gate and this door. And then he will stand before me, spent and slow and brilliant, and he will understand that he has run the entire length of the war only to arrive at a wall, and that the faster he ran to get here, the harder he has struck it." The red eyes glittered in the thickening light. "He thinks this is the moment he wins, Bellatrix. He has thought so all year, every time he was fast enough. It is the most useful thing about him. Bring me the doors when they break. I want to watch the fastest thing alive discover that it has spent the whole of itself running into the one room it was never going to be able to leave." And the anchor turned and the present welded shut, and far to the north a fourth thread did not snap, the snake still lived, the boy not yet arrived, and Lord Voldemort settled back to wait the last few seconds of a war he was certain, with the certainty of a thing that had made itself immortal, that he had already won. The assault on Malfoy Manor had been going for 90 seconds when Harry arrived, which meant that to Harry, crossing the last miles in the stillness, it had been going for no time at all. He came down out of the dark and through the breach the Order had torn in the Manor's wards, and he dropped into the amber and saw the whole battle hanging frozen in the grounds, Ron mid-spell at the gates, Hermione's shield caught in the act of blooming, the Death Eaters and the Resistance locked in a stopped tableau of curses and bodies, beautiful and terrible, a war held in glass. And he ran through it untouched, the way he had run through everything, a consequence with its sentence already passed, into the manor, up the great stair, toward the drawing room where his instruments told him the snake would be, and the man and the girl. He should have wondered why it was so easy. He understood his mistake the instant he crossed the threshold of the drawing room, because the moment his foot came down inside it, the stillness broke, not the way it broke when he let go, gently easing back into the world's own speed, but violently wrenched out of his grip by something outside himself, the amber shattering all at once into full roaring time. Harry stumbled into the room at ordinary speed, a wounded gray boy, and the door of the speed slammed shut behind him, and he could not open it. The anchor turned in the center of the room. He knew it for what it was the moment he saw it, the brass and crystal and slow-nested rings, the captured unspeakable kneeling beside it, the whole forbidden apparatus turning and welding the moment shut. He reached for the stillness and it was not there, not gone, he could feel it, but held, locked away behind a door the anchor had sealed, the seam between seconds clamped down and bolted. For the first time since the night on the bike, Harry Potter could not find his speed. And Lord Voldemort rose from the high chair at the end of the room, where he had been sitting waiting, patient as he had been patient for a year, with Nagini coiled at his feet and Ginny Weasley bound and white-faced in the chair beside him. And he smiled the terrible smile, because the fastest thing alive had run as fast as it could straight into the one room in all the world where speed did not work. "There you are," said Voldemort softly, echoing, though he could not have known it, the words Ron had spoken in a cold, safe house a lifetime ago. "I have been waiting, do come in, you will find, I think, that you are not in a hurry anymore." He gestured at the turning anchor almost fondly. "It holds this moment still, welds it to the foundation of time. You cannot run past me into the second before, there is no second before, not while it turns. There is only now, only this, only the room I have built for you. Your door is closed, Harry Potter, the one you swore never to open again. I have closed it for you so that you need not be tempted." The red eyes glittered. "I told you a year ago that I did not need to be faster than you, I needed only to be there first, and here I am first. Waiting at the one finish line your speed cannot help you cross." Harry stood in the welded moment, gray and wandless, fast and slow, and looked at Ginny bound in the chair, and at the snake, and at the man, and at the turning engine that had taken the only thing he had left to spend, and understood with the cold clarity that was all he had now, the exact and perfect shape of the trap. He had 3 soul pieces left to kill the snake, and a thing in Voldemort he did not yet fully understand, and the man, and no speed to kill them with. He had a girl to save and no stillness to save her in. And the only thing in the room that could break the lock, the only force that could stop the anchor turning and give him back his speed, was the same force the unspeakable had warned the Dark Lord about: destroy the anchor and it would not simply release him. It would release everything. All the welded time at once, the end of before and after, the end of the world. "You have a choice," said Voldemort, and sat back down and folded his long white hands and prepared to enjoy the only victory he had ever been certain of. "Accept the moment I have made in which the girl dies and you die and I keep the world, or break my anchor and unmake all of time to spite me and end the world yourself with your own hand to deny me a prize that will no longer exist." He tilted his head. "The fastest thing alive, brought to a room where the only way to win is to do the one thing you have sworn never to do, and where keeping your vow costs you everything you came to save. Take your time, Harry. It is the one thing now that you have a great deal of." And the anchor turned and the moment held, and the war came down at last to a boy who could not run, a girl who would not break, a snake, a serpent of a man, and a single welded second that the fastest thing alive would have to win without any speed at all. Outside, the assault was paying for the welded second with lives. Harry could not see it, but it was happening all the same in the slow, roaring world beyond the drawing-room door, and it was the cost of the window Hermione had drawn on the map. The Order had thrown its whole remaining strength at Malfoy Manor to clear Harry's path and hold it open, and the price of holding a path open against the mass Death Eaters of a fallen Britain was the only price the war ever charged, which was the highest one. Ron fought at the gates with a wand in one hand and his brother George at his shoulder, and they did not all of them who held it live to see the morning. Hermione's shield stood between the killing curses and the children of Dumbledore's army, and they held in the holding cost. The Resistance bought Harry his 90 seconds with the same coin Harry had spent all year learning he could not save anyone from spending, and they paid it knowing, and they paid it gladly because they had decided, every one of them in the cold dawn before the assault, that a chance to end the war was worth whatever a chance to end the war cost. Wind off the Wiltshire Downs moved across a battlefield going quiet in patches, and the Resistance held the doors, and behind those doors a boy who could not run faced a man who had made certain that running would not help. And Ginny Weasley, bound in the chair beside the Dark Lord, watched Harry come through the door and lose his speed and go gray and still, and made her decision. She had spent her captivity learning the room. She had listened through the cellar stone, and then, when they brought her up to bait the trap, she had used the one thing a year of being underestimated had taught her, which was that people who think you are only bait do not watch your hands. She had worked her bonds loose over the slow hours, not free, not yet, but loose, the ropes a half-inch from sliding, and she had watched the anchor turn, and she had watched the captured unspeakable kneeling beside it flinch every time the Dark Lord came near, and she had understood before Harry ever arrived the thing it would take Harry precious seconds to work out, that the engine in the center of the room was not only a lock, it was also a vault. "Tell him the rest," Ginny said. Her voice cut across the drawing room, clear and steady, and both of them turned, Harry gray by the door and Voldemort serpentine in his high chair, because neither of them had expected the bait to speak. Ginny held the Dark Lord's red eyes with the directness that was the truest thing about her, the thing that had led an army of children against the Carrows, and she did not let herself shake. "He's worked out the trap," she said to Harry fast before they could stop her. "The door, the choice, break it and end the world, but he hasn't told you the rest, because the rest is the part that beats you. The anchor isn't just a lock, Harry, it's a Horcrux. He put a piece of his soul into it." She saw Harry's face change, saw him understand. "That's why you can't just kill the snake and then kill him. The last piece isn't in the snake, it's in the engine. To finish him, to actually finish him, you have to destroy the anchor, and destroying the anchor ends the world. He built it so the only thing that can kill him is the one thing that kills everything. That's the trap, that's the whole trap." The silence after she finished was the silence of a plan laid bare, and Voldemort, after a moment, inclined his head toward her with something that was almost respect and entirely cold. "She is cleverer than I was told," he said. "A pity, yes, Harry, she has the shape of it. I have spent a year learning what you would not do, and I have built my immortality into the one object you cannot destroy without unmaking everything you came to save. The snake is a Horcrux, yes, you may even kill it if your spent little speed can manage one last strike. It will not matter. The last piece of me turns in the heart of the anchor, and the anchor cannot be broken without breaking time, and so I cannot be killed without ending the world." He spread his white hands. "Kill the snake. Kill every servant I have, it changes nothing. As long as the anchor turns, I am beyond death, and as long as I am beyond death, the war is mine, because I have all the time there is, and you, Harry Potter, have spent very nearly all of yours." Harry stood by the door, gray and slow and wandless fast, and looked at the turning engine, and at the snake coiled at the Dark Lord's feet, and at Ginny with her bonds a half-inch from loose. And he did the only thing he had left to do, which was the thing he had always done, which was think, not at the speed of the stillness, which was locked away from him now, but at the ordinary mortal speed of a frightened boy in a terrible room, which turned out in the end to be fast enough. Because he had spent a year learning to think in the seams between seconds, and the habit did not leave him just because the seams had closed. He looked at the problem the way Hermione had taught him to look at every problem, from first principles against the panic. The anchor held the present still. It welded this moment to the foundation of time so that he could not run to the second before. It could not be broken without releasing all the welded time at once, the end of before and after the end of the world. And the last piece of Voldemort's soul turned in its heart so that the man could not die while it turned. 3 facts, a locked room, and somewhere in the geometry of them Harry knew the way he had always known there was a way through a burning street, a way to bring a person through the speed, a way to stand still and let it cost him. Somewhere in the geometry of them there was a door. There was always a door. The anchor had closed the one he had sworn never to open again. But a boy who had spent a year learning the physics of impossible speed, who had been into the deep of the speed force and climbed back out, who had one run left in the clarity of a man with exactly one coin to spend, looked at the engine that had taken his speed and began slowly in the welded and unmoving second to see how the trap might be turned inside out. "You closed my door," Harry said. His voice was quiet and steady, and Voldemort, who had been victorious for a year, heard something in it that made the smile falter for the first time. "You welded the present so I couldn't run to the past. You were very clever about it. You thought of everything." He looked up, and his green eyes in the gray ruin of his spent and dying face were perfectly clear. "But you made one mistake, Tom, the same one you've made about me from the start. You spent a whole year proving that speed wasn't the question, that the question was what I wouldn't do, and you were right. It was never about how fast I could run." He took a step into the room, toward the turning anchor, toward the snake, toward the man, toward the girl, toward the welded second where the whole war waited. "It was about what I was willing to spend." And you've just made the mistake of trapping me in a room with the one person alive who has finally figured out exactly what he's willing to spend, and exactly what it's worth, and exactly how to spend it so that it counts. Outside, the resistance held the doors, the anchor turned. Ginny's bond slid a half-inch looser, the snake stirred. And in a drawing room where speed did not work, two minds that had spent a year learning each other bent toward the same single second. And the war came down at last to the question it had always been underneath the lightning and the running, not who was faster but who understood the cost and was willing to pay it and had something left worth paying it for. Harry Potter took another step toward the man who had made himself a god and smiled, and the smile was not afraid. And somewhere very far down in a country with no floor, the chorus went silent and still and listened, because even the oldest fast thing in all of creation had never seen what the boy was about to do. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The fastest wizard alive. Harry had worked out three things while Voldemort was still gloating, and the first of them was that he was going to have to die to win, and the second was that he was at peace with it, and the third was that he was not going to tell anyone in the room which of the two he had chosen, because the whole of the war now turned on Voldemort believing he had chosen wrong. The trap was perfect, and a perfect trap has exactly one flaw, which is that it assumes its victim wants the same thing the trapper does. Voldemort had built a room in which Harry had two choices, except the welded second, in which Ginny died and Harry died and the Dark Lord kept the world, or break the anchor, end time, and unmake everything. The trap assumed that Harry would treat the second choice as unthinkable. The whole edifice of it, a year in the building, rested on the certainty that the boy would never, to spite his enemy, end the world. And the boy would not, that part was true. But Voldemort had made an error so old and so deep that he could not even see it as an error because it was woven into what he was. He had assumed that breaking the anchor and ending the world were the same act. He had assumed it because to him they were, because Lord Voldemort, faced with the collapse of all sequence, the loose flood of every welded moment pouring out at once, would have no way to survive it and no thought but to die taking everything with him. He had built the engine to be unbreakable by the only kind of person who would never break it, and he had never once asked the question that Harry, who had been into the deep of the Speed Force and climbed back out, was uniquely able to ask. When the anchor breaks and all that welded time comes loose at once, where does it go? The unspeakable had said it himself, kneeling and broken. It releases all the time it was holding at once, uncontrolled, uncontrolled. The flood had no riverbed. That was why it ended the world, not because the time was destroyed, but because it poured out with nothing to channel it, every moment happening at once in the same place, the end of before and after. A flood with no riverbed drowns everything, but a flood with a riverbed is only a river. And Harry Potter was the fastest thing alive, a hand the Speed Force had put out into the slow world, a creature who had spent a year learning to be the border of the country of speed, to wrap the impossible stillness around other things and bring them through unharmed, and there was in all of creation exactly one thing shaped correctly to be the riverbed for a flood of loose and uncontrolled time. Him, his last run, not spent crossing space. Spent being the channel, taking the whole released flood of welded time into himself, through the door the Force had opened in him, and running it back out into its proper sequence, one moment after another in the right order, before and after restored, the world rethreaded onto the string of time by the one creature fast enough to do it. It would cost him everything. The deep of the Force had told him the truth. One run left, and at the end of it nothing, dissolution, home. To be the riverbed for all that time was the most expensive thing he could possibly do, and it would spend the last of him utterly, and he would pour out into the lightning along with the flood and never come back. But the world would come back. Resequenced whole, with Voldemort's last soul piece dead in the broken anchor, and Voldemort himself made mortal at last, and Harry gone, dissolved, the price paid, the war won. He was at peace with it. That was the thing the deep of the Force had given him, and he understood now what it was for. Not despair, but the particular clarity of a man who knows the exact worth of the one thing he has left to spend, and has found at last something worth the whole of it. So he did not tell them. He let Voldemort believe the choice was accept and die or break and everything, because as long as Voldemort believed that, Voldemort believed himself safe, believed the boy would never break the anchor, and a Voldemort who believed himself safe was a Voldemort who would not see the real attack coming until it was a year too late to stop. The trap had a flaw, and the flaw was that the trapper could not imagine a victim who would walk into the unthinkable choice and find, waiting inside it, a third door that only the fastest thing alive could open. "You're very quiet," said Voldemort. "Are you choosing, Harry? Take your time, I did promise you a great deal of it." "I'm choosing," Harry agreed. "Give me a second." And then several things happened in the space of that second, in the welded and unmoving present, at the slow mortal speed of people in a room, because Harry's stillness was locked away. And so for the first time in a year he fought a battle the way everyone else fought, in real time, with nothing but his wits and his courage and the people who loved him. And it turned out that the year of speed had taught him how to win that fight too. Ginny moved first. Her bonds had been a half-inch from loose for an hour, and she had been waiting, not for a chance to save herself, but for the one moment when the Dark Lord's whole attention was fixed on Harry, and Harry, by stepping toward the anchor and speaking, had given it to her. She slid free of the ropes in a single motion, and she did not run for the door because she was a Weasley and Weasleys ran toward, and the nearest weapon in the room was the fallen wand of the broken unspeakable kneeling beside the engine, and the nearest target that mattered was the snake. She had heard Harry tell it across a year of the war. The snake is a Horcrux, the snake is the one he keeps closest, the snake is a piece of his soul. She did not have Harry's speed. She had something the trap had not accounted for at all, which was a furious girl with a year of being underestimated behind her, and an army leader's nerve, and exactly one thing she could do to crack the unbreakable room. She came off the chair and she had the unspeakable's wand in her hand, and she put everything she was into a single cutting curse. The spell Bellatrix had used to open Harry's side, learned and turned now against the Dark Lord's own, and she took the snake's head off where it coiled at Voldemort's feet. Nagini died with a shriek that was not an animal's shriek, and a piece of Voldemort's soul guttered out of the world, and the Dark Lord screamed in rage and disbelief because the bait had bitten, because the soft center of Harry Potter had just killed his familiar with his own servant's wand, because the trap that accounted for everything had not accounted for the girl having a will of her own. 4. And in the half-instant that Voldemort's attention broke, turned toward the dead snake and the living girl, toward the impossible insult of being wounded by his own hostage Harry Potter, who could not run, who had no speed, who was gray and spent and slow, did the one thing left that did not require speed at all. He crossed the last 3 feet to the anchor at the pace of an ordinary boy, and he put his hands on it, and he broke it. The world came apart. There is no honest way to describe what the breaking of the anchor was like, because it was the unmaking of the very things sequence before and after that descriptions are made of. The brass and crystal shattered under Harry's hands, the last soul piece screaming as it died, and all the welded time the engine had been holding came loose at once, the way the unspeakable had warned. Uncontrolled, a flood with no riverbed, every moment the anchor had clamped to the foundation of time, releasing in the same instant into the same place. The drawing room ceased to be a room and became a place where all times were happening at once. The morning and the evening and the year before and the year that would not now come, the curse that had opened Harry's side and the curse that never would, Lupin alive and Lupin dead and Fred grinning, every welded second pouring out together into single drowning now that did not finish and would never finish, the end of the world arriving not as fire but as a moment that refused to end. And Harry Potter opened the door, not the door of the anchor that was already broken, the other door, the one behind his ribs, the one he had sworn over Lupin's body never to open again, the one the chorus had been waiting a year for him to open. He opened it all the way, wider than he had ever opened it, wider than the night he fell into the deep of the Force, and he did the thing he had worked out while Voldemort gloated, the thing only the fastest thing alive could do, the thing that was the whole and final meaning of his speed. He made himself the riverbed. The flood of loose time poured toward the drowning now, and Harry stepped in front of it, not in space, there was no space anymore, but in the only way that meant anything, he put himself between the uncontrolled flood and the world, and he opened the door behind his ribs and let the whole of released time pour through him instead of over everything. It came into him like the sea into a drowning man, all of time at once, every welded moment, and it would have torn any other creature in creation to nothing in less than no time, but Harry was not any other creature. He was a hand the Speed Force had put out into the world, a thing built precisely to channel the impossible, to be the border of the country of speed, to take what could not be survived and carry it through unharmed. He had brought a terrified cat and a teacup and 6 people from a burning house through the stillness. Now he brought the whole of time through himself, and he did with it the only thing that could save the world. He ran it back into sequence, one moment after another, in the right order, before and then after. He took the drowning now where all times happened at once, and he threaded it fast, faster than any runner had gone since the first of them, faster than the chorus had ever seen, the last and greatest run of his life spent not crossing a single inch of space but standing perfectly still and running time itself back onto the string it belonged on, moment by moment by moment, the morning before the evening, the cause before the consequence. The world resequenced and rethreaded and made whole by the one creature fast enough to do it. It cost him everything, exactly as the deep of the Force had promised. He felt himself going. He felt the shape called Harry beginning to dissolve into the flood he was channeling, pouring out along with all that time into the country with no floor, the lightning rising up to take him the way it had always meant to take him, the way it took every runner in the end. The chorus was singing, not greedy now, not patient, but exalted, welcoming, joyful, because the newest of them, the freshest river, was coming home at last, dissolving into the bright, endless run where nothing was ever too slow and nothing was ever lost. He was almost gone. The world was almost whole and Harry was almost nothing, the riverbed wearing away as the flood poured through it, his name and his face and his self thinning into light. It was not death, it was the opposite of death. It was the end of ever being too slow, and it was so warm and it was so near, and he had spent the last of himself on the only thing it was ever for, and he could rest now, he could finally rest. Harry, a voice, a hand. Through the dissolving and the lightning and the welcoming song, a single voice that knew his name, his real name, the one under Harry and Potter and the fastest thing alive, the one the Force had called him at the very beginning, except it was not the Force calling it now. It was Ginny. She had crossed the unmaking room through all times happening at once. And she had found his hand where it rested on the broken anchor, dissolving into light, and she had taken it in both of hers and held on, the way Hermione had held his lit and flickering hand 100 times, the way Ron had hauled him up off a cold floor, and she said his name again, and again, an ordinary girl in an unmaking world holding onto a boy made of light, refusing with a Weasley's stubbornness to let the lightning have him, and Harry, almost gone, heard her. The chorus had told him the truth about everything except this, and it was the one thing it had never understood, the one thing no fast and ancient and bodiless thing could ever understand, that the love was not the friction. The love was the riverbank. He had spent a year learning that he could not run without a wake, could not bring a thing through the speed without making it part of himself, and now dissolving, he made the most important thing in his life part of himself one last time, and it was not the speed. It was the hand holding his. It was Ron's fist and Hermione's notebook and Ginny's voice saying his name in the dark. It was the whole warm world he had been running toward since the night on the bike, and it reached into the lightning where the fastest thing alive was pouring out into eternity, and it held on and it would not let go, and it gave the riverbed something the flood could not wear away, a reason to stay a riverbed, a reason to stay Harry, a finish line on the near side of the light that called him back. He finished the run. He threaded the last of time back into sequence, before and after restored the world whole. And then, instead of pouring out after it into the chorus and the lightning and the endless luminous rest, instead of going home to see the way every river before him had gone, Harry Potter turned in the deep of the speed force where turning was the same as choosing, and he climbed back up his own dissolving toward the hand that held his and the voice that said his name, hand over hand against the current of his own homecoming for the last and hardest time. And in the welded final instant before the world's clock started again, in the single restored second that he had threaded back into being, with all of time pouring through him and the speed at his command one last time, faster than he had ever been, faster than anything had ever been, Harry looked across the room at Lord Voldemort. The Dark Lord stood where he had always stood, in the high chair at the end of the room, and he was screaming, because his last soul piece had died in the breaking anchor, and his snake had died at a girl's hand, and his immortality had ended in the space of a second. He did not understand. He was mortal now. For the first time in 60 years, Lord Voldemort could die. And he was reaching for his wand in the slow mortal way of slow mortal men to kill the boy and the girl before the world's clock started again, and he was against the fastest thing alive in the last instant of its speed, exactly as slow as everyone had always been. Harry crossed the room before the wand finished rising. He did not kill Voldemort with speed. That was the thing the chorus had never understood, and the thing Voldemort had never understood, and the thing Harry himself had only learned at the very end, that the speed had never been the point. He crossed the room before the wand finished rising, yes, the last gift of the last run, the fastest the world would ever see him move, but when he arrived in front of the mortal Dark Lord, he did not strike him down in a blur of impossible velocity. He simply took the wand out of the slow rising hand, the way he had taken 11 wands from 11 snatchers in a forest a lifetime ago, and he stepped back, and he let the world's clock start again. Time resumed. The threaded river of it ran forward, before and after restored, the drowning now resolved back into an ordinary second in an ordinary room. And Lord Voldemort, mortal, soulless, his Horcruxes dead and his snake dead and his anchor broken and his wand in the hand of the boy he could not outrun because being outrun had never been his problem, stood in the high chair at the end of the room with nothing left, no immortality, no trap, no time, no speed of his own, and no way to flee the one creature who had all the speed there was. "You built a room where I had to choose," Harry said. His voice was very quiet. He was dying, he could feel it, the riverbed worn nearly through, the speed pouring out of him for the last time and not coming back, but he was not gone because a hand still held his, because Ginny had not let go, because the finish line had called him home to the near side of the light. "Accept the world you made or break it. You were so certain I'd never break it, and you were right. I didn't break the world, Tom. I broke your engine and I caught the world as it fell, and I put it back together 1 second at a time, because that's what the speed was always for, not to win, not to rewrite, not to keep anything from ever being lost, to catch things, to carry them through, to be the riverbed when the flood comes." He looked at the mortal man, and there was no hatred in it, only a vast and final clarity. "You spent a year teaching me that the question was never how fast I could run. It was what I was willing to spend. You were the best teacher I ever had, and I've just spent the whole of myself to set right a single second, and there's nothing left in me for you at all, because you were never worth the cost, and a war isn't won by killing the man. It's won by making him small, by making him a slow and mortal thing in a room full of people who are no longer afraid." He could have killed him then. He had the wand and the speed, the last guttering instant of it, and the right. He did not. He had learned over a dead man's body in a burning dark that the not doing mattered more than the running, and the truest not doing left in him, the last discipline of the fastest thing alive, was to refuse to make the end of the war into one more death he chose. He turned away from Lord Voldemort, mortal and disarmed and finished, and he left him for the slow world to judge, for the order coming through the doors, for the resistance that had bought this second with its blood, for the long, ordinary justice of people who would no longer have to be saved a half second at a time. And the slow world took him. Kingsley came through the drawing room door with his wand up and a dozen of the resistance behind him, into a room where the Dark Lord stood mortal and weaponless, and the war was already over. And what happened to Tom Riddle after that belonged to them, to the law and the living, and not to the boy who had spent everything to give them the chance to decide it. He was beaten not in a blur of lightning but in the plainest possible way, outmaneuvered, made mortal, disarmed, and handed to the people he had spent a lifetime terrorizing, who found with him slow and small and finished in front of them that he had never been anything they could not have faced together all along. Then the last of the speed went out of Harry and he fell. He woke in a bed at the burrow, which should not have been possible because the burrow had burned. That was the first thing he understood. Lying in the morning light in Ron's room under the eaves, the burrow stood. The crooked walls, the orchard out the window, the smell of frying from below. It had burned the night Bellatrix took Ginny, burned to the ground, and now it stood whole, and Harry lay in it and worked out slowly with the ordinary mortal slowness that was all he had now, what it meant. He had threaded all of time back into sequence, all of it, the whole released flood, every welded moment put back on the string in the right order. And in the putting back, the fire that had taken the burrow had been one of the loose moments he carried through, and he had set it back where it belonged, in a sequence where the house had been rebuilt after, and so the house stood. Not unburned, rebuilt, the difference mattered. He had not rewritten the fire away, he had only refused to let it stay where the anchors breaking had scattered it. The world he had threaded back together was the true world, scars and all, the one where the burrow burned and was rebuilt and stood, not a clean one, not a kind one, just the real one set right. Because that was the rule he had broken once over Fred and learned forever over Lupin. You cannot make a clean world. You can only catch the true one as it falls and set it back on its feet and let it keep its scars. The dead stayed dead. That was the cost, and Harry made himself count it the moment he was strong enough to sit up, because Hermione had taught him that you do not waste a cost by refusing to look at it. Remus Lupin was dead, and Harry had not rewritten it and would not. The young witch in the northern cavern, the one he had run past to keep the window open, was dead, and the others the run had cost. The resistance who had bought his 90 seconds at the gates, all of them dead and all of them his to carry, and he carried them. He had not saved everyone. He had never been able to save everyone. That had been the lie the chorus told, the hook in the door of time, the temptation that nearly took him. He had saved the world, which is a different and smaller and truer thing, and it had cost exactly what it cost, and he would spend the rest of his life knowing the names. But Fred Weasley was alive. That one rewrite, the first and the worst, had threaded back through into the true sequence too, because Harry had pulled him from the curse's path and the world had balanced it with Lupin. And the balance, however terrible, was now simply part of what had happened, fixed, real, unrewritable. Fred was downstairs making jokes Harry could hear through the floorboards. Ginny was asleep in a chair beside his bed, her hand still in his, because she had not let go since the drawing room, not through the fall, not through the carrying home, not through the long night when no one had been sure the boy made of light would stay a boy. And Ron and Hermione were there when he woke, and the warmth of them, the whole warm, crooked world he had run toward since the night on the bike, closed around him like a country with a floor. They told him the cost over the following days in pieces because no one could bear to tell it all at once. The assault on the manor had bought Harry his 90 seconds, and the price of the buying had been paid in the grounds while Harry was in the drawing room threading time back onto its string. The Order had held the gates against the mass Death Eaters of a fallen Britain, and they had held them, and not all who held had lived to see the war end 9 minutes later. Harry made Hermione read him the names from the notebook she had never stopped keeping, and he listened to everyone because a cost looked at squarely as a debt honored and a cost looked away from as a death wasted, and he had learned the difference in a burning street with a child in his arms. Bellatrix Lestrange had died at the gates, and the manner of it became, in the years after, the kind of story the Resistance told to remind itself that it had never been the boy alone who won the war. She had cut her way through the Order's line toward the manor doors. The finest and cruelest duelist Voldemort had the blade he had spent a year honing against the impossible boy, and she had come laughing upon Molly Weasley, who had buried a brother in the first war and very nearly a son in this one and had watched her home burn and her daughter taken, and who was not that morning a thing that anyone should have laughed at. Molly had met her in the open ground before the doors, and the two of them had fought, mother against torturer, and when Bellatrix sneered something about the daughter she had stolen, Molly Weasley had stopped fighting like a frightened woman and started fighting like the end of the world, and Bellatrix Lestrange had not lived to learn the difference between the two. She saved the assault, Hermione said quietly. When Bellatrix went down, their line broke. That's part of why the doors held long enough. Your mum, she caught herself and did not correct it, because in every way that mattered the word was true. Molly bought you part of your 90 seconds, Harry. She'd want you to know it wasn't only you. It was never only me, Harry said. That was the whole thing I had to learn. The speed made it look like it was only me. It never was. And then there was Severus Snape and the truth of him, which came out only after the war was won and could no longer get him killed. He had survived barely, and to everyone's astonishment, least of all his own. He had walked the wire to the very end, fed Voldemort enough true intelligence to be believed, and shaped every truth to serve a master the Dark Lord never knew he kept. And at the last he had done the one thing that made Harry's 90 seconds possible. He had let Voldemort believe the boy's exhaustion was the floor, the real limit. The whole of the weakness had confirmed it in careful detail exactly when Voldemort needed to hear it, And so the Dark Lord had built his anchor to trap a boy who tired, and had never thought to ask whether a boy who tired might also be a boy who would spend the last of himself on purpose. Snape had not known the shape of Harry's final gambit. But he had spent a year making sure that Voldemort's certainty about the boy was built on a foundation Harry could pull out from under him at the chosen moment, and when the foundation went, the whole trap went with it. Why? Harry asked him once in the one conversation they ever had about it in the white quiet of the hospital ward where Snape lay healing from a wound that should have killed him. All of it, the whole war. Why did you ask me a question I'm willing to answer, said Snape in a voice like cold iron, or leave me to heal in peace? And then after a long silence, looking at the ceiling and not at Harry, he said, your mother once knew a boy who was always too slow to keep the people he loved from being hurt, too slow to take back the worst thing he ever said. His black eyes closed. I have spent a lifetime being too slow, Potter. I found at the end that I could not bear to watch the fastest thing alive make the same mistake. That is the whole of my answer, and it is more than you are owed, and you will not have another word of it. And he never gave one. But Harry understood and carried it and counted Severus Snape among the people who had won the war, which was an accounting Snape would have despised and deserved all the same. There was a memorial after. There is always a memorial after. They held it at Hogwarts in the grounds below the rebuilt walls, and the whole of the resistance came and the families of the dead. And the long lists were read aloud, Lupin and Tonks and the young witch in the northern cavern whose name Harry had made himself learn. And all the others, the named cost of a war ended in seconds by a boy who could not save them all and had never pretended otherwise. Harry stood at the front because they made him, and he did not speak about the speed, not once, because the speed had not been the point, and he would not let the dead be turned into a footnote to his impossible gift. He spoke instead about the holding of doors, about the buying of seconds. About a mother in the open ground and a spy on a wire and an army of children with coins, and how the fastest thing alive had only ever been a single hand, and a hand is nothing without the body that aims it and the heart that sends it and the people standing at the edges calling the board. He spoke for a long time, slowly, at the ordinary mortal speed of grief, and when he was done there was not a person in the grounds who believed any longer that the war had been won by one boy, which was the truest thing Harry Potter ever did with his fame, and the last good use he ever made of having been for 1 year the fastest creature in all the world. The slow world took a long time to put itself right, and Harry, slow now himself, helped it the only way that was left to him, which was patiently. The lists were the first thing. The ministry had kept lists of Muggleborn summoned, of families flagged, of children marked for the Carrows' attentions, and in the weeks after the drawing room those lists became, instead of sentences, maps. Maps of who had been taken and where, so that the resistance could go and bring them home. Harry went on many of those journeys on foot at the ordinary speed of an ordinary young man, because there was no longer any speed in him to do it faster, and because he found he did not want there to be. He had spent a year arriving before anyone knew he was coming, a consequence without a cause, a rescue that left its rescued blinking and bewildered in an empty field. Now he arrived the slow way with his friends beside him and knocked on doors and sat in kitchens, and helped frightened people gather what little they had and walk back into a world that had decided at last to let them live in it. It was slower, it was so much slower. And it was better because the people he helped could see him coming and thank him and be helped by a person instead of saved by a force, and Harry had learned the hard way, the whole long way, exactly how much that difference. He and Ginny walked back from one of those journeys in the early summer dusk, along the lane toward a burrow that stood whole against a sky going gold, and she took his hand the way she had taken it in the drawing room and had not really let go of since. Do you miss it? She asked. The speed, honestly. Harry thought about it, the way he thought about everything now, slowly, with all the ordinary time in the world. Sometimes, he said. When I see something about to go wrong and I know I'd have been there already a year ago, that's hard. I'll always reach for it and find it gone. He turned her hand over in his. But I spent a whole year being the fastest thing alive, and the truth is I was never further from anyone. I lived in a different second than everyone I loved. I watched the whole world from inside a gap nobody else could enter, and the faster I got, the lonelier the gap was, until the only voice that could reach me was a thing in the lightning that wanted me dead. He looked at her, at the gold light on her face, at the ordinary unfrozen evening moving at exactly the speed of the two of them walking through it. I'd rather be slow and be here in the same second as you than be the fastest thing that ever lived and be alone in mine. It took nearly losing everything to learn it, but I'd rather be slow. Ginny was quiet for a few steps, then she said, good, because I spent a year watching you disappear into that gap and I'm not letting you back into it. You're staying out here in the slow world with the rest of us. She bumped his shoulder with hers, where someone can keep an eye on you. Where someone can keep an eye on me, Harry agreed, and they walked the rest of the way home in the gold light at the only speed that had ever mattered, the two of them in the same unhurried second and the war behind them and the long ordinary years ahead. Can you feel it? Hermione asked him days later in the orchard under the old bramley that still bore the black split scar of the lightning. She did not have to say what. She had kept the notebook to the very end and she knew the shape of the question better than he did. The speed, the door, is it still there? Harry was quiet for a while listening. The chorus had been silent since the drawing room. The wire behind his ribs, the patient note, the thousand voices at the bottom of the well, all of it gone quiet, spent, the riverbed worn through. He reached for the stillness gently the way he had that first dawn in this same orchard, and the world did not pour into amber. It stayed exactly as fast and as slow as everyone else's world, the apples falling at the ordinary speed of apples, the morning arriving in its own good time. It's quiet, he said. I spent it, all of it nearly, there's almost nothing left. I'm slow now, Hermione, as slow as anyone. He turned an apple over in his hand, an ordinary apple, picked at an ordinary speed. I keep waiting to be sorry about it, I'm not. I spent a year being the fastest thing alive and it nearly took me apart, and the best thing I ever did with it was give it away to catch the world. I think I was always going to have to give it back. Every river comes to the sea, I just got to choose what I carried there. He smiled, and it was the smile of a boy who had been very old for a year and was at last allowed to be 16. And I came home instead of going. But it was not entirely gone. He did not tell her that because it was the kind of thing you guard rather than fill, but he knew it in the quiet, the way you know whether coming. The chorus was silent, not absent. The door behind his ribs was closed, not sealed. Somewhere very far down in a country with no floor, the lightning still ran, and it remembered his name, his real name, the one under all the others, and it was patient, the way it had always been patient, with the immense, unhurried patience of a thing that has all the time there is. It would not call him soon. He had spent too much, there was too little left, and he had a slow and mortal life to live now, with a girl whose hand he meant never to let go of, and brothers found and brothers kept, and the long, ordinary years he had bought for everyone, himself included. But the door was ajar, it would always be ajar. And on some far morning, when he was old and tired, and the slow world had given him everything it was going to give, Harry Potter knew, with the last quiet certainty of the fastest thing that had ever lived, that he would hear the chorus rise again and feel the wire draw taut behind his ribs, and the apple would hang unfalling in the bright and frozen air, and he would run one final time toward the light he had turned away from once for love, and that time at the end of the run. He would let it take him home. Until then he lived, slowly and gratefully, and at exactly the speed of everyone he loved, which turned out in the end to be the only speed that had ever been worth a thing. Chapter 7 End.